Thank you everyone for joining us. This is our first Regional International Trash Trap Network workshop. So this workshop today is all about connecting with and building capacity for groups in West Africa and beyond, and for learning about trapping trash as a solution to the global issue of plastic pollution. And we're very, very thrilled to see you all here and for us all to connect today on our shared vision to reduce plastic pollution. So thank you very much for joining, and we hope you enjoy it. And so to start, I'll introduce myself for those of you that I don't know. So my name is Frond, and I coordinate the International Trash Trap Network, and I am one of your facilitators for today, and I'll be presenting later on as well. So a little bit about me before we begin. So I'm from the UK. And a few years ago, I did my master's in marine environmental management, where I began researching plastic pollution. And then following this, I moved to Canada, where I spent a wonderful few years in Toronto, working in Chelsea Rochman's lab at the University of Toronto. And throughout this time, I carried out research on microplastic and plastic pollution, and I volunteered with the University of Toronto trash team. And I now work, and lucky enough to work with both the trash team and Ocean Conservancy to coordinate the International Trash Trap Network. And you'll notice there are a few other people that have ITTN Zoom backgrounds today. So I want to give a brief introduction to the rest of the ITTN team as well. So because we are a collaborative program between the trash team and Ocean Conservancy, we have lots of us all working together to make it a success. And so you'll be hearing from lots of these individuals throughout today's workshop. We also have joining us today is Toshka Barnardo. So she's litter monitoring lead researcher and project coordinator for Sustainable Seas Trust in South Africa. And I'll just give a brief introduction for Toshka, but I'm sure we'll introduce her again later. She graduated with a Master of Science degree in zoology from Nelson Mandela University. And in her role, she coordinates the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association Marine Litter Monitoring Program, for which partners for 7 African countries are collecting and sharing data on a regional level. And this project looks at the amount and type of litter found on land, in rivers, and in the ocean within the partnering countries. And the results are used to raise awareness and reduce litter locally, nationally, and regionally within East Africa. Toshka is also the primary editor of the African Marine Litter Monitoring Manual, which is a guidebook for litter monitoring in various different habitats. And with other members of her litter monitoring team, she's facilitated training for this in workshops in South Africa and internationally. And Toshka is very passionate about citizen science and science communication, and she's always looking for ways to make research more accessible and impactful. And so we are very grateful to have her with us for today's workshop and discussion. So thank you, Toshka, for joining. And I also want to say today's workshop is also made possible from the support of our collaborators and supporters. So I'd like to take a moment to thank the Norwegian Retailers Environment Fund for supporting the ITTN and allowing us to hold workshops such as this to meet all of you and to talk about this important issue together. And so to bring us back to what we have coming up in today's workshop, here is a quick look at our main objectives for today and tomorrow. So our objectives include sharing the value of trash trapping devices and their role in fighting plastic pollution, motivating collaboration between stakeholders in the region of West Africa, and sharing lessons learned from our experience, and ultimately building a network of teams working independently towards a common goal of increasing our cleanup efforts and quantifying our impact collectively, and building programs that engage the community and ultimately inform upstream management and solutions. And so here's a quick look at what we have coming up today. So once we conclude the introduction, we'll move on to share some more details about the ITTN and our collective vision for trapping trash, and how the network was formed based off of efforts from the U of T trash team and Ocean Conservancy. And then we will then move on to hear from Toshka from the Sustainable Seas Trust about their work in the Nelson Mandela Bay Area. And then we'll have a quick 10-minute break And then when we return, we'll be discussing the options out there for different trash trapping technologies. And then we'll have a 30-minute break for lunch. And then later this afternoon, we'll resume to hear from Rafaela Gutierrez from the U of T trash team, and she'll be sharing the recipe for trash trapping success, so everything you need to know for a successful project. And then after the later break, we'll then head into our final session or sessions, which will be separate breakout rooms, and we'll discuss the finer details of trash trapping projects together, the different aspects, and then we will wrap up for the day. So we have a lot crammed into today's workshop, and hopefully you'll leave all feeling inspired and motivated to trap trash together and start your own project. So we hope you enjoy it. Okay, and then one final housekeeping thing. So as you might have noticed, we do have time built in within each session for some Q&A, and our team will facilitate this. And so if you want to ask questions, speak and ask your questions, then you can raise your hand, and then we can ask you to turn on your camera and ask your question. But you can also ask your questions in the chat as well, and we'll keep an eye on that throughout. And finally, we'll be sharing about the workshop on Twitter today, and social media. So if you do want to follow along or share your thoughts, then please do, and you can tag the U of T trash team and Ocean Conservancy at our ocean, and use the hashtag trappingtrash. So we'll keep an eye out for those today too. Okay, so one last thing before we get into things. We want to hear from you, so everyone joining us today. Firstly, we are hoping to hear what you're hoping to learn during the workshop today. So please let us know what you're hoping to. Can someone tell me if I open the chat on my screen, will it pop up for everyone else?
You're good, we can't see it.
Okay, cool. Chelsea is excited to learn about the different groups trapping trash and interested in trapping trash around the world. Me too. I'm looking forward to hearing about different projects and what everyone's thoughts are and where everyone's at so far in their trash trapping journey. If any, Britta's looking forward to learning about more about everyone's organizations, yeah, and everyone's trash trapping journeys, current or future. Me too. And in addition to this, you can also type this in the chat. It says do it on the Zoom poll, but we'll do it in the chat. So you can also let us know what type of group you're representing today in your organization, so that we can all get to know each other a bit before we begin. Sarah's looking forward to learning about Toshka's experience and Sustainable Seas Trust experience with their traps and what other traps might already exist in the network. Me too. Great, thank you. Yeah, how to ensure traps are effective, and you're representing the South Africa plastics industry. So data collection, yeah, we'll cover that. Learning more about trash traps and what opportunities there are in representing Green Up Gambia. Hello. excited and keen on understanding how trash trapping works, where it has been tried, and the level of success. Yeah, interesting. Representing community groups and environmental networks in Kizimu. I hope I said that correctly. Okay. Thank you everyone for sharing. I am just going to pause for a moment, and I think it's about time now that we kick things off properly. So I am going to be starting, and I'm going to be sharing about the International Trash Trap Networks. I will just switch my presentations and I'll move on to the first presentation of the day. Oops. Okay, so to start, I'm going to give a brief overview of the International Trash Trap Network and our goal to connect local solutions to tackle global plastic pollution. So, as we all know, plastic pollution is a global issue. It litters the entire globe from top to bottom, and from the surface of the ocean to the deep sea. And by weight, most of the plastic is large pieces, like you can see in the first photo, but by count, most of it is microplastics. And so because our plastic waste has become so ubiquitous, microplastics have become pervasive, cycling in our water cycle, global dust cycles, and arguably as parts of the carbon cycle. For impacts, we know that large plastic litter can choke, entangle, and smother wildlife. And we also learned that microplastics are leading to measurable risk in our oceans and freshwater environments, and that if we continue to allow concentrations to increase, that risk will become more widespread. So as a result, it's time to act now. The good news is that across the world, action has begun. And so the global movement really picked up in 2015, when the world agreed that 8 million tons of plastic going into our oceans every year was not acceptable. And this estimate came from a famous study published by Jenna Jambeck. And to this day, we still hear this number cited a lot in presentations and studies. However, we have a new number, it's now outdated. So in 2020, we published a study using a new model, and using this model, we predicted that up to 34 million tons of plastic waste was emitted into aquatic ecosystems in the year 2020. And this is 3 to 4 times the previous 8 million tons number. And this is because we included emissions from freshwater environments, so rivers and lakes, but also due to an increase in production, consumption, and emissions of plastic since the previous study was published. And so we use this model to project into the future to determine how much plastic emissions are predicted to change under different scenarios for mitigation. And what we found was, if you follow the yellow line on the figure on the screen, we are headed towards as much as 90 million tons of plastic emissions per year by just 2030, so less than 10 years away if we continue business as usual. And so this is quite scary, but luckily we have not agreed upon this future, but we do have a lot of work to do to avoid this happening. And so the work we have to do falls into 3 general categories for mitigation, and these include plastic waste reduction, so which includes bans on single-use plastics and the reuse or recycling of plastics so they stay in the value chain. It also includes waste management, so for example, the collection of waste to be brought to a management facility. And finally, it includes cleanup, which is the strategy we'll be focusing on today. When we looked at the efforts that would be required to make a meaningful difference to plastic emissions globally, we concluded from the study that there was no one-size-fits-all strategy to plastic pollution, and so we need locally informed solutions. And we also found that while we agree that cleanup should not be the only part of the solution, our model suggests that waste reduction and sustainable management are critical, but cleanup is also a really important part of the equation, and that we need all three types of strategies happening at once to achieve global targets for reducing plastic emissions. And so, as we all know, a significant amount of plastic waste is already accumulated in the environment, and community cleanups around the world are doing a great job at collecting millions of pounds of trash each year. But to make a measurable difference now and into the future, we need to increase cleanup efforts worldwide by orders of magnitude. And so the question is, how can we do this? And that is where we believe trash traps come in. So trash traps, as we'll speak about them a lot today, are technologies designed to clean up and divert plastic and other anthropogenic pollutants from our waterways. And they can supplement cleanup efforts by running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they can also collect waste items from large macro debris to small microplastics that are often really challenging for us to collect by hand. And so lots of different devices are out there. And because there's now quite a wide variety available, a suitable device can be chosen for each scenario and waterway. And so, for example, in a large river channel, you might have lots of floating macro debris, and so a trash wheel or a trash boom might have the greatest impact. And in a harbour front slip full of floating microplastics, a sea bin, which you can see on the left, might be the best solution for cleanup. And the primary benefit of trash traps is to capture and divert waste, but they do have other benefits too. And so they can be really great focal points for public education and awareness of plastic pollution. So by talking to the public about how they work and what we capture, it can demonstrate that plastic pollution is not a faraway issue, it's happening right on our doorsteps, and that cleanup is one of the ways that we can manage it locally. And what's more, trash traps can act as sampling tools for data collection. So by understanding what we capture and what the common waste items are in our waterways, we can understand sources and inform upstream solutions and policies. And so all of these things can happen on a local scale, but collectively they're part of the global solution. And so in realizing the value of trash traps, both locally and globally, the ITTN was born. So we launched in March last year, and the aims of the International Trash Trap Network are to exponentially increase global cleanup efforts and to quantify our collective impact as part of the international coastal cleanup. And so just as community groups collect trash and cleanup data each year with the ICC, we do the same using trash traps. And we also aim to bring together local stakeholders to build trash trapping programs that will not only clean up our waterways, but will engage the community and collect valuable data to inform upstream solutions. And so to measure the success of trash trapping projects, we've developed harmonized data collection methods that are easy to use from anyone from scientists to community volunteers. And so we have 2 different protocols that groups can use depending on your time, people power, and goals. And we'll go through these in more detail later. So the simple protocol is carried out every time the device is emptied. And using this method, you can just document the weight of debris collected. And then if you want to dive into the details of what the categories of items are, we also have a detailed protocol that's carried out multiple times per year to capture how waste changes across the seasons. And using this method, groups can document the mass and count of large waste items and microplastics, or what we call tiny trash. So this method allows us to quantify different types of litter to inform the sources and then the solutions. To record data, we have paper data sheets, but we also have the free Data Trapper app. For some of you might be familiar with Ocean Conservancy's CleanSwat app for recording cleanup data. And so we are glad to say that we will have trash trapping data submission available on CleanSwell very soon as well. And once data is reported, we summarize it with the ITTN. And at the end of each calendar year, we share local reports on trash trapping achievements, including the total weight of debris captured and the top items that you recorded. And so we wanted to do this because by summarizing data for each group, we hope to make it really easy and as simple as possible for groups in the network to use the data that they've collected to inform policies around plastic pollution locally and for other things such as outreach and education and other reporting. We also summarize the network-wide international achievements, and this data is included within the International Coastal Cleanup reports. And as many of you already know, all ICC data is publicly available, where it can be used by anyone from research to policy. And so, as I've mentioned, trash chats can be a really good focal point for education. And so the ITTN has created resources for this. So we have posters that you can put by your devices. We also are developing activities such as guided waste characterizations that can be adapted for different locations and traps and age groups. And we hope that these activities can create opportunities for hands-on experiences and provide the opportunity for community members to understand their local pollution sources and solutions. And we have some groups in the network are already getting quite creative with this. So the photo that you can see on the left is Inspector Stegman. He lives in Tobermory in Canada, and a group developed him to draw attention to their Stegman, and apparently he gets a lot of attention on their harbour front. So it's great to see stuff like this happening. Finally, we see the network as a platform to learn from each other and to avoid reinventing the wheel as trash trapping efforts grow. So currently, groups can share their data and connect via our social media channels. We have a Facebook group that you're more than welcome to join, and you can connect on there with other groups to seek advice, ask questions, and learn from groups who might have done similar projects to you. We're also holding regional workshops such as this one to facilitate knowledge sharing among stakeholders in specific regions where we know that trash trapping interests have grown. And so we'll be sharing information on joining the network throughout today's workshop, but we've aimed to make it really simple to do so. So you can contact us via our email address. All our resources are available on our website, and you should have also received them in the attendee package for this workshop. And we also have these available in English and French and Spanish. And as soon as you're set up with a trash trap and you want to get started, you can start using the protocol straight away and begin collecting your data and connect with other groups. So I will share in just a moment some of the details for joining the network in the chat. But for now, I think that is it from me. So I will stop sharing.
Okay, and then turn it over to me. Is that right, Hannah?
Yeah, I am turning it over to you. So Chelsea is up next, and Chelsea is the head of operations and program lead scientific programming and application for the University of Toronto trash team. And she's also assistant professor in ecology at the University of Toronto and scientific advisor to the Ocean Conservancy. So Chelsea's been researching the sources, sinks, and ecological implications of plastic debris for more than a decade. In addition to her research, she works to translate science beyond academia, and she'll be sharing a bit about the trash team now. So over to you, Chelsea.
Thank you. Can you see my screen okay and hear me?
Yeah, all good.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning for those of us that are on the West Coast or East Coast of North America. I'm excited to talk to you today about the sort of our origin story. So I'll describe who the trash team is and the work that we do around trapping trash and how that initiated us to start the Trash Trap Network with Ocean Conservancy. So I'll start by just introducing what the trash team is. So we are a community outreach organization that functions out of the University of Toronto. We have a goal, which is to increase waste literacy in our community in order to and while reducing plastic pollution in our ecosystems. So we do this through community outreach and education, which we think are really important tools in terms of implementing solutions and motivating solutions for plastic pollution. We also do a lot of solutions-based research, which helps inform solutions to plastic debris. And so when we started the trash team, we had this dream of getting a Mr. Trash Wheel in Toronto. We wanted to call it a trash bandit, and it was going to be a raccoon. For those of you that are not familiar with the city of Toronto, we have a real raccoon problem, although some of us love our raccoons and they love our trash cans. And so we had an idea to get a trash wheel similar to the one in Baltimore, which is removing a lot of garbage from the marina and harbor there. And put it in one of our big rivers in Toronto. We also had a goal of doing projects that were very local because we think waste management is most effective at a really local scale. But we have plastic pollution as a global problem. And so we wanted to do local work that could collaborate with and inform global work to help mitigate the global issue. And so we didn't end up getting a trash wheel, but we did end up starting the trash team around this idea. And instead of getting trash wheels, we were able to get other types of trash traps with a bunch of stakeholders in Toronto as part of a project that we call the Fighting Floatables project on Toronto's waterfront. And as we started getting trash traps and bringing stakeholders together, which is a really important part of the work, we created the Toronto Inner Harbor Floatable Strategy with many of the stakeholders that you see here. These stakeholders include nonprofits that are in the area, the Conservation Authority, which is sort of like half government, half nonprofit, as well as the business community on the waterfront and government, and of course, Ports Toronto, who owns the harbor and manages the harbor. And so together we created a floatable strategy, and the work that we do that's key to the project is basically trapping trash as well as tracking trash. And so we have we've done visual audits to understand where the garbage goes and is, and we have put GPS tagged bottles into the water to understand how plastic moves around. And all of that informs where we put trash traps and the types of trash traps that we have. We currently have both Lita traps, which are in the ground under storm drains, as well as sea bins, which are floating garbage cans that filter the garbage out of the water. So just to give you an idea of where we are, so we are right on the Laurentian Great Lakes in North America, which is right between the United States and Canada. We are in Toronto, and our work is done in our major harbor front. So it's a really heavily urbanized area. And we have our Lita traps and our sea bins all along the waterfront here, as well as at an outer harbor marina just adjacent to the harbor. Our work is really fueled by our volunteers and team at the U of T trash team. And actually the group that does our characterization of the waste is our students that we hire in the summer. So we give them jobs in the summer that are paid positions where they can come and both empty our trash traps as well as quantify and characterize the debris within them. We feel it's really important to use traps to remove debris from the water, but we think it's equally important to quantify and characterize the debris so that we can measure our impact, but also inform upstream solutions. And because we felt that the quantification and characterization was as important as trapping the debris and diverting it, we took the time to create protocols that we could use to quantify and characterize the amount of debris and the types of debris that we find. And so we created two protocols, a simple protocol and a detailed protocol. They are now the protocols used and suggested to be used as part of the International Trash Trap Network. We purposefully tried to create these protocols out of materials that are easy to buy and inexpensive for people to use around the world, and to try to create protocols that are accessible to all the different groups that may characterize debris, which could include school groups, local volunteers, undergrad students in our case, or other people working for nonprofits or even government. And so with these protocols and with our students, we're basically able to describe our impact every summer. And I say every summer because our traps would freeze over in the winter. So we have a season, and our season is when the water is not frozen. So for some people, they can trap trash all year. For us, we simply cannot. And so here's just an example of the amount that we can collect over a season and that type of data that we share. And I think what's also incredibly important is figuring out what we are actually trapping. So our large debris, we get a lot of cigarette butts and single-use plastic items and foam and other materials like fragments. And then we get a lot in our traps of microplastics or larger sized microplastics. And the majority of what we see are hard fragments that we can't quite tell what the origin is, but we also get a lot of bits of foam and a lot of pre-production pellets. And so these we know are coming from the industries upstream. And by understanding what we find in our traps, we can use that to inform different projects that we do on upstream solutions. And so Hannah mentioned in her talk that the benefit of, or that we need many different solutions for plastic pollution, one of which is reduction, and one of which is better waste management, and one of which is cleanup. And so by understanding what we're collecting, we can also better inform waste management and reduction. So I just want to spend the last few minutes of this presentation talking about how we use some of the data in order to inform reduction projects. And so we have pollution prevention projects as part of the trash team. These are usually research projects that are run by undergraduate students, although one of them this year was an art project, which was a lot of fun. And these are on our top items that we find in our traps. So foam, pellets, cigarette butts, and single-use foodware. And so for foam, we had an undergraduate student, Gloria Gao, who's now working on her PhD at another institution, look at the amounts of styrofoam that we collected and create a foam library to understand how much of it might be from construction and how much of it might be from single-use takeout, because a lot of our foam didn't look like it came from single-use takeout. So she created a library proving basically that the plastic from construction had bromines in it. And then she collected plastic from the local beaches in styrofoam, and also styrofoam in manta trawls out in the harbor and in the rivers. And she used a machine to be able to quantify the bromine in those samples. She found that about 50% of the foam she was collecting had bromine, suggesting construction as a source, which allows us to then work with the city to think about how you would prevent that. As I mentioned earlier, we find a lot of pre-production pellets in our traps. So we are actively working with industry. Eden Hadley is a PhD student leading this project. Right now, we're working with the industry through their Operation Clean Sweep and thinking about best practices for industry, but also giving traps to 6 industries upstream to put right at their point of manufacture, seeing how many pellets we divert from going into our rivers, and then seeing whether it makes a difference at a watershed scale. We do believe there should be regulation around pellet loss, and we're hoping our work can inform that regulation locally. Here is our art project on cigarette butts. We found that most people do not know that cigarette butts have a plastic filter and that cigarette butt pollution is plastic pollution. And so we had our students make posters that were shown in our transit shelters in Toronto. We worked with a local group called the Water Brothers, who's on a local channel here. They run kids programming and also documentary. And they interviewed the public to understand knowledge about cigarette butts as plastic pollution. And while we ran the educational campaign, we measured the amount of cigarette butts that were in our Lita traps and also in transects where we quantified on sidewalk. And we did see a reduction in cigarette butts during the campaign versus before. And finally, Rafaela, who you'll meet today, has been looking at single-use foodware, and with undergrad students, she's interviewing the restaurants around the waterfront and trying to figure out how we can better implement reusables programs. What do they need to be successful? Are they interested? And how much do they know about the issue? And the good news is they're interested. They know about the issue. They want to do what's good for the environment. They just need support. And so we've been working on these projects locally, as I said, with Ports Toronto, but it initiated also collaboration in Vietnam as well as across the Great Lakes as part of the Great Lakes plastic cleanup. And so this sort of sparked an idea to, hey, let's see if we can scale up to create the International Trash Trap Network so that we can truly work at a local scale, but think globally and help inform global solutions. And so Ocean Conservancy was excited to bring this idea on board, and together we created this network just over a year ago. So I just want to thank all of our collaborators and stakeholders, really just to show how important it is to have those key people in the region working together with a shared goal. And I will look forward to answering questions when we get to that Q&A session later. So thank you, everyone, and I'll turn it back to Hannah to introduce Allison.
Thank you, Chelsea. So next up, we have Allison Schutes from the Ocean Conservancy. So Allison is Director of International Coastal Cleanup, and in this role, she oversees Ocean Conservancy's cleanup and education initiatives. Allison and her team engage nonprofit, corporate, and government partners in the issue of ocean plastics and catalyze over 1 million volunteers to document and remove over 20 million pounds of trash from global beaches and waterways annually. So Allison, over to you.
Thanks so much, Hannah. And it's so great to see so many familiar names. I would say faces, but I think most of us are off video, but so many familiar names. So a lot of this will probably be stuff that you already know, and maybe just like a big thank you from us at the Ocean Conservancy team to all of you on this call. So as Hannah said, I'm Allison Schutes. I currently serve as the director of the International Coastal Cleanup. So I basically just wanted to kind of welcome everyone and give a little bit of perspective about how Ocean Conservancy feels about the International Trash Trap Network, how we got involved, and kind of where we see this trajectory going. So again, a lot of this is probably a lot of overview for most of you on the screen, but again, wanted to give a little bit of that background. So as we see, right, we know some of the immense issues that our ocean is facing, right? We know we're taking too much out of the ocean and we're putting too much into it. And I think the latter is probably what we're really focusing on here during this conversation in this workshop, is really the issue of plastics. And so what we do know, sorry, I'm just trying to make sure my screen goes forward. Go, can we go? Where's my screen? All right, there we go. Sorry about that. So basically, Ocean Conservancy really obviously works on the crux of those two issues, trying to make sure that we're creating a better ocean for our future generations, and really trying to become stewards and bring people along on that stewardship journey. So we work across a bunch of different ocean issues, ocean planning. We work across certain regional issues, such as in the Florida region, up in the Arctic, obviously working on the issues of fisheries and climate. But, you know, plastics is really our bread and butter. And we have been working on the issue of plastics with our partners pretty much since the inception of Ocean Conservancy, but really most notably for the last 37 years through the International Coastal Cleanup. A little bit more about Ocean Conservancy. So we are an organization that is based in the US. We have a few offices throughout the United States, kind of in coastal towns, coastal cities, with a good majority of our team being based in Washington, DC. So we just celebrated our 50th anniversary as an organization. And so we're just really excited to be able to continue this journey and work with such incredible partners from around the world. Even though we are based in the United States, obviously, as Chelsea and the rest of the presenters so far have talked about, you know, we have this really exciting initiative just kicking off with our partners up in Canada and really trying to continue this work more globally. And what is that work, right? What are we trying to do? I think we all are familiar with scenes like this. We know the issue of plastics, and plastics just are ubiquitous. They are everywhere. And we all know that, probably more so than pretty much anyone else on this planet, right? I think you are all here for a very specific reason. And so scenes like this are not shocking to you. We know the power of cleanups. We know the importance of cleanups. I think this equation has already been discussed. We know that in addition to other solutions and more systemic solutions of policy and waste management, we do know that the element of just sheer cleanup, both people power, mechanical power, technology, that is going to be critical to kind of our future solution to this issue. And so, you know, through the power of cleanups, we really have been able to see kind of the impact and the different types of things that we're being able to collect on beaches. And so we are just so excited to be able to take kind of this people power and really turn it into power of collecting trash 24/7 through the partnership of networks around the world, and really trying to build off the International Coastal Cleanup and off these really impressive data that this network has been able to create and share and really educate the world. If we're looking pre-pandemic, you know, nearly 1 million volunteers in 2019, over 1 million volunteers in 2018, collecting these just massive numbers of individual items. And so we're thinking, you know, working with Chelsea, working with the trash team, working and learning from the experiences they've already discussed, you know, imagine turning this power into, again, that 24/7 kind of effort towards helping our oceans. And that's really where I think we're so excited about the International Trash Trap Network, and couldn't be more excited about really working to grow and expand this critical history of the International Coastal Cleanup, things that really would not be possible without partnerships and without individual organizations and individuals like you all represented here. You know, these numbers are just, every time I look at these numbers and these images and these pictures, there's like kind of a little flutter that we all get, right? These numbers are just extraordinary. And they're only possible. These numbers are only possible because of people and because of networks and partnerships. And so that is really the foundation of the International Coastal Cleanup. And now I think really turning into the foundation of the International Trash Trap Network. How can we come together in, you know, very diverse regions all around the planet, learn from each other, learn how we can take lessons from the last 35 years and apply them to the next 35 years? How can we increase our impact? And so, you know, we are just so excited at Ocean Conservancy to be able to be part of this network and help kind of host and just try to catalyze this work as much as we can. Because again, at the end of the day, it's really about, you know, incredible individuals such as yourselves really being the leaders, not just in communities, but the global leaders who are taking this issue to the next step and taking this issue towards where, you know, a few years we'll be looking back and going, wow, you know what really was transformative? When we came together as a global community, created these networks that not only just harness the power of individuals and people, but also technology and these mechanical solutions. So when people can't be out on the beaches, or when Canada is frozen over and the rest of us might not have as much ice, we can still be having an impact, working through data collection and you know, trash trapping technologies, and working together in addition to the harnessing the power of our individuals, our communities. We just feel like really the sky is the limit on the impact that we all can have together. So on behalf of all of us at Ocean Conservancy, welcome. Thank you for taking time out of your days to join this workshop. We couldn't be more excited to be really kicking this off. As we said, this launched almost exactly a year ago. And I think the impact thus far in 1 year is really impressive. And we really just can't wait to see where this goes. So this is my contact information. If you ever need anything, I think, you know, we're going to hear some amazing information and presentations throughout the rest of the time we have together. But really just from my end, thank you so much for coming, for joining us on this journey, and, you know, looking forward to kind of working together in this new venture, in this new opportunity, all of us together. And yeah, just thank you, Hannah, thank you, Chelsea, and all of you again on the screen. This obviously, again, would not be possible without each and every one of you.
Amazing. Thank you, Allison. So I think now we actually have a few minutes for any questions anyone has for myself and Chelsea and Allison before we move on to our next speaker. So please feel free to let us know in the chat if you have a question, or you can raise your hand via Zoom and you can unmute yourself and then ask the question.
Maybe while we're waiting for questions, Hannah, there was a question earlier while you were giving your presentation about documents translated in other languages, and particularly French.
Yeah.
Can you maybe speak to those materials?
Yeah, of course. So we have translated our materials into French. So there are French versions available. They aren't online just yet, I don't think, but we have them. So if anybody would like those, please just let us know, and we can easily send those over. And we hope to, as the network grows and we have different groups in different countries speaking different languages, then we will hope to translate our materials into more than English and French and Spanish, which is what we have now. Thanks for highlighting that, Chelsea.
Any other questions either in the chat, or you can raise your hand and speak them out loud.
Okay.
If not, we'll just be incredibly on time.
Yeah, exactly. Very prompt. Okay. Then we will move on to our next section of the workshop, which is will be facilitated by Rafaela. So I'll just quickly introduce Rafa for those of you that don't know her. So Rafa is program lead of social science and educational programs at the U of T Trash team. She oversees the creation and delivery of the waste literacy school programs and is involved in our solutions-based research. So I'm going to hand it over to Rafaela. She'll be presenting later, but she's introducing our next speaker as well.
Okay, thanks, Hannah. So my task here is really fun. I will introduce our next speaker. Can you all hear me well?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I will introduce our next speakers. That is Toshka Barnardo, but Hannah already did a very good job, so make my life easier. So thank you, Hannah. So it's a pleasure to introduce our next speaker is Toshka Barnardo. She is leader monitoring lead researcher and project coordinator for the Sustainable Seas Trust in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. She also graduated with a Master's of Science degree in zoology from Nelson Mandela University, and she will be presenting today about their leader monitoring in trash trapping works in Nelson Mandela Bay region. I'm very excited to hear what she will share with us. So Toshka, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Rafaela. Okay, so my screen is sharing. Thank you so much for inviting me again today. I just wanted to give a disclaimer before I start that I might be switching back and forth between the words trash, litter, and waste. So please bear with me. We don't really use the word trash in South Africa, so I'll try my best to stick to it. Go like this. So first, an introduction to Sustainable Seas Trust, or SST, as I will be referring to us from here. So we are based in South Africa, at the tip of Africa, and in Toshka, which you might know as Port Elizabeth, which was its previous name. And we have a population of about 1 million people. It's one of the biggest cities in South Africa, sorry. Then, as you can see, it's a beautiful city, but unfortunately we have, like many other big cities in Africa, a big litter problem. So sites like these aren't uncommon, unfortunately, in the city. So because of that, SST is working to reduce waste in Toshka by doing education, awareness, research, and economic incentive campaigns. And ultimately, our goal is to achieve zero plastics to the seas of Toshka and also Africa. So through our African Marine Waste Network program, we have mandate to work in all 54 African states, and we have key partnerships and collaborations with organizations around Africa and internationally. So a part of our research department at SST, we are doing plastic pollution research. And that includes surveys of litter on land, or trash, sorry, on land, in rivers, and on beaches. So for the time being, we've been working on beaches and rivers and land, sorry, and we've only recently gotten approval to work in rivers. So what I'll be telling you is really us in the infancy stage of our project. So we are going to share some successes and failures, unfortunately, but that's how it goes. So as was mentioned before, it's important to collect data, not just clean, because data can give us very valuable information about how much waste there is, what the problem items are that we need to reduce, where the hotspots are pollution, where the pollution is coming from, and also how it's being distributed in the environment. So that crucial information is obviously then being used to guide action plans to more effectively manage plastic waste and reduce leakage into the environment. Then going on to studying litter in rivers, as we mentioned before, most of marine litter comes from land. That's been mentioned quite a few times. Sorry if I'm having a lag in between, my computer's giving me some issues working with the presentation. But we know that most marine litter comes from land, and the way it's making its way from land into the ocean is through rivers, which are a major source of ocean-bound plastic. So current global models give estimates of between 0.5 and 30 million tons of plastics leaking into the ocean annually. So just to put that in perspective, 30 million tons is about the same weight as over 2,500 African elephants being dumped into the ocean. Or for the Canadians, 52,000 grizzly bears being dumped into the ocean. I also did the quick maths for raccoons, and that's over 2 million raccoons, if you want to visualize that. So it's clear that we need to do local riverine surveys and collect data to strengthen those global models and estimates so that we can more effectively manage plastic waste. And yes, as we mentioned, we should not just clean, we should also collect the information. Then there are various different ways to trap trash in waterways. They have some really cool other designs that Hannah was telling us about earlier. I wish we had the raccoon thing here, or something similar. I can't think what we would have here, maybe a mongoose or something. So what we have in South Africa is litter traps that we have in stormwater canals and waterways, and we have litter socks, or whatever you would like to call it, that's over a stormwater outlet. And then litter booms, which are just flotation devices that captures floating litter at the surface of the river, and then litter nets, which essentially works the same as booms, but captures litter throughout the water column. So they have obviously different advantages and disadvantages. Litter socks especially are quite hard to work with, but they have been very successful in cities like Cape Town. And we also have a lot of studies using litter booms, or a lot of projects using litter booms and litter nets. So for our first attempt to study waste in our rivers, we thought that litter booms would be the obvious choice. And the reason being is it has been tried and tested by various organizations in South Africa, and it's been very successful for them. So Plastics SA have some representatives here today. They have very effective booms in Cape Town. And the Litter Boom Project also have some booms in Cape Town and in Durban as well. And they've removed tons of waste from the rivers. So some benefits of the litter booms are that they are cheap to use. There are different designs available, depending on what you need for your local conditions. They are semi-permanent, so they're quite easy to install and remove, and also quite easy, or relatively easy, to get permission compared to other traps. And also they have a relatively low impact on the environment, as they allow animals to move freely underneath or over the booms. So another reason we chose booms was that we got most of the materials donated. So I'm really glad that I included Plastics SA in this, seeing that they're attending today. Got to win those brownie points. So they donated the nets for us, and that's most of the cost usually. So we got the nets donated from Plastics SA, and then our staff members kindly brought in plastic bottles that they were going to recycle, and we use that as the flotation devices. Then for determining where we want to study, we mapped the stormwater systems in all 3 rivers in Gutierrez, and then we selected sites based on the potential to have a maximum impact. So we obviously want to remove as much trash as possible, but we also need to ensure that the data we're getting from that is useful. So we're wanting to identify sources of waste and where it's coming from, so that we can then implement measures to reduce it. So it doesn't help if there are too many things influencing the waste in that area, then we can't identify exactly what the first issue is to focus on, because, as you know, resources aren't always available, so we need to go sometimes just for the biggest issue, or one issue at a time. And then we also considered the environmental impact. We wanted to ensure that we don't damage any natural ecosystems, so where there's any protected sites or animals, we won't be working there. And then we had to unfortunately consider, not unfortunately for the staff, but unfortunately we have safety as an issue here in many of the locations that we're wanting to work in, so we have to consider where it's actually safe for us to work as well. And then we also considered feasibility. So some really nice sites are in the Swartkorps River, but unfortunately that's quite far, and it's really not feasible for us to go out once a week to go clean the booms there, as we have a lot of other work also. So unfortunately at this stage we could not survey those sites. So based on those factors, we selected 2 sites where we could easily do pilot studies for the river surveys. So in terms of the sites, we selected a site in the Barkens River and in Poppenkales River, and these 2 are about the same length if you look at the main river and its tributaries. And then the catchment area above the litter booms for the Barkens Valley one, or the Barkens River, it's 4 square kilometers, but if you take into account the entire river, then it's about 20 kilometers, square kilometers, sorry. And then the catchment area for Poppenkales is 41 square kilometers. And then major land use for Barkens is residential and commercial mostly, and then for Poppenkale, it's residential, sorry, my computer issues, residential and industrial. And then the Barkens River is natural in most areas, but in some it's also highly modified and canalized. And Poppenkale is highly modified, with a lot of natural fauna and flora being lost in that river. And then both rivers are also quite shallow and narrow. So that means that the waters rise very quickly and they fall very quickly after any rain, and the flow and force of the river increases rapidly after rain, which you will see later has caused some issues for us. And then in terms of vegetation, the Barkens River has very dense trees and shrubs and grasses along the river. And for Poppenkales, it's usually just concrete and some grass and shrubs in some areas. So for our litter booms, we first had to apply for a permit from the Department of Water and Sanitation. So we did that, and then unfortunately COVID put a spanner in the works there for us. I don't know if that's a South African saying, but it made things a bit hard for us when lockdown came into use and the municipality was shut down. So we had to wait for 2 years to get feedback on our application, and then it was finally approved at the end of last year. So we were quite keen to get going and install our booms. So the design we use, or the setup, is, you can see in the diagram, we use the design and methods that's discussed in the upcoming 2nd edition of the African Marine or African Litter Monitoring Manual now. And we installed the booms at about a 45-degree angle to the direction of the river flow, and that just allows the litter to accumulate in one corner and makes it easier and more feasible to clean. And then the boom is anchored on either side of the river. So here you can see the design. We use 2 types of booms. So the first is this one that you can see here with the bottle acting as a flotation device. And then it has a net curtain of ours was 30 centimeters. And then we use a weight, and we in this instance used stones that we stitched into the net. And that just helps keep the curtain down, and then that helps us capture litter that's slightly below the surface of the river. And then we also use a similar boom that just does not have a net, a curtain, sorry. So it just has a flotation device at the top. And then we secured the booms on either side of the river using metal rods. And where available, we used trees. We just had to ensure that we didn't damage any protected trees. But luckily, or unluckily for us, there's quite a lot of invasive trees in the Barkens River Valley, so we've used those to anchor some of our booms and later on the nets I'll tell you about. So here you can see us assembling the booms. Our GIS specialist Sean spent many hours figuring out how to best assemble the net, and after many hours of stitching we finally were able to install the booms early this year. So after we've put the booms in, we were very happy to see that they were actually capturing some litter or intercepting litter, and we were finally able to remove trash from our rivers after many years of waiting. So we were quite excited about that. And we noted that most of the trash that we found was after rainfall, with litter coming down the river, with almost no litter coming down the river during periods of no rainfall. And large parts of South Africa and Gqeberha is prone to drought. So we've been in a drought for a few years now. And yeah, so that means that mostly we don't get litter flowing down the river, but once it rains, there's so much litter being built up in the streets and in the stormwater drains that flushes out in one go every time it rains. Okay, so some of the challenges we've experienced with our booms are that we found that they are less efficient in shallow and narrow and turbulent rivers. So unfortunately, as I mentioned, both the rivers we're working in are shallow and narrow, and that means when the water comes down, it's also quite turbulent because the water rises and falls so fast. So unfortunately, that causes the litter to either flow over the booms or underneath the booms. And because the river bank's also quite steep in some areas, that also leaves some space for litter to escape underneath the booms. Then because of this high force of the river when it comes down, the boom's also prone to breakage when it rains hard especially. And here in the photo you can see where the arrow is pointing, that's our boom. It snapped on the one side and luckily remained intact on the other side. So we were able to reattach it and yeah, go from there. And there's a photo there of litter just downstream from our boom, so we can see when the boom is missing litter, because especially in Barkens, because of the surrounding vegetation that act as litter traps. So after our failure with the litter booms, we decided to try a method that will hopefully catch more litter, even in the small narrow rivers. So we chose litter nets as an option because they are cheap, or relatively cheap compared to other more permanent devices. They can trap trash at different levels in the water column, and they are effective, or theoretically effective, in turbulent water. So those were very important characteristics for us. Then in terms of study sites, we use the same study site as before in the Barnardo River. As I mentioned, there's been a loss of fauna and flora there, so there aren't really any fish there, or there aren't any fish there. So we didn't have to worry about blocking any routes of animals in the water, any aquatic animals there. In the Barkens Valley though, on the Barkens River, we moved the site to a site that has a lower risk for the environment, and it's just downstream from a stormwater canal, a canalized stormwater canal. So that reduces the risk of any potential threat to animals. Then the next one, so this is the design for the net that we used. Ideally you would anchor the net in the river as well if you don't have a very rocky substrate. Or in our case, we had the concrete canal in Barnardo River. As I mentioned, the entire river is canalized, so we couldn't go into the concrete, so we had to use weights to weigh the net down, so that litter doesn't go under the net when it becomes when the water gets turbulent. And then we anchored the net on both sides of the river, and we made sure to also extend the net to above the floodplain. So as you'll see soon, when it rains, as I mentioned, the river rises very fast, and then a lot of litter is deposited on the floodplain, and that's quite a key zone where we're collecting litter during rainfall events. And then we used some extra rods and tied ropes to the bottom of the net just to anchor it more. And that really quite helped. And we also made sure to tie the weights to the bottom of the net because, as anybody who's worked in a river can tell you, water's very strong. So we had to ensure that the weights stay with the net. So luckily, or we've designed it so that the weights, the poles are strong enough to maintain the entire net. Then we also used 2 nets. So I forgot to mention with the booms, we used the booms with only the flotation devices without the curtain. We used that upstream, and then a few meters downstream we would use the one with the curtain, so that the first one would stop most of the big items of litter and the very buoyant items, and then that just reduces the stress on the second boom, and that can capture smaller items and items floating beneath the surface. So we use the same principle here with the nets, but we use a larger mesh size upstream, so that can capture all the big things like PET bottles and plastic bags. And so we use a mesh size of 10 centimeters for that, and then we use a 4.5 centimeter mesh downstream to capture any smaller items that were missed by the bigger net. Then here you can see how the net extends above the floodplain and how it's captured litter when the river rose. And then you can see the posts on either side of the canal to just reinforce the net there, and then we also have posts higher up above the floodplain. And then we have wire above the net and in the middle of the net to help secure it. And then we use a winch to tighten the wire so we can easily loosen and tighten it whenever we need to. Sorry, there's the winch. So we installed the nets with some volunteer help. I don't know how free he was to choose if he wanted to volunteer. This is my father. So he helped us install the nets, and it was quite a day. It was very hard work. You can see here we used the high-tech solution of repurposing building rubble as weights to hold the net down. And it's been working quite well. We got this from a illegal dump site just up the road. And then we also got tangled in wire quite a bit during the day, but luckily we saw that it started working almost immediately. As soon as the nets were up, we started seeing litter getting trapped by the nets. So we achieved success with the nets. We were quite happy. Even the first time we went back, so we go back once a week. During the pilot stages. So the first time we went back, we saw this, which was much more than we ever got with the litter boom. So we instantly knew that it was more effective because the rainfall wasn't as much different from what we had before. So we were quite excited to see this, but also it was quite daunting because we knew that it still has to get cleaned. So cleaning the nets. It can be quite a task because of the amount of litter coming down the river and it getting stuck into all the little blocks in the net. It becomes quite a task. So that's one of the major downsides, I would say. We estimated that it takes between 2 to 4 hours per site, so per 2 nets, to clean the net. And sometimes it gets quite tiring. Here you can see the 3 of us on the floor sitting in the river with our waders on and picking through the biological material to get to the litter. In terms of collecting data, we first remove the biological material. We're not too concerned with that. And then we sort the trash. And we also make sure to keep the recyclable items separate so that we can take it to waste reclaimers. And then we categorize and count the litter into categories based on the basic macrolitter data sheet that is included in the 2nd edition of the African Litter Monitoring Manual. And this data sheet is designed for citizen scientists, so it divides litter into 30 categories, and those categories are things like plastic takeaway containers, polystyrene takeaway containers, and sweets wrappers, so things that can help you manage plastic more efficiently upstream. And then once we've done with the counting, we also weigh the litter. So at this point, we're only doing wet weights. because it's just unfeasible for us to do dry weights. I'll talk to you about the grossness of the situation a bit later, but at this point we will not be doing dry weights. So our preliminary findings, after 3 weeks in operation, so after getting approval late last year for the booms, we implemented them early this year and did a pilot study, and then decided throughout the year that we want something that's more efficient in trapping trash. So we went to the nets, and it's only been in operation 3 weeks. 4 weeks now, they went yesterday. But from the 3 weeks and 6 surveys we did, so 3 surveys per site, we collected 24 bags of litter or trash, and that was almost 7,000 items of waste, and it weighed 110 kilograms. And of that litter, almost 85% was plastic, and 12% was cardboard and paper, and then other items like metal cans and glass made up the remaining 5%. In terms of the most common items found, polystyrene pieces, normally from fast food takeaway containers that have broken apart. Those made up the most prominent items, with over 1,200 items collected. And then sweets wrappers were also quite common, especially the really small ones. They are really quite irritating, if I'm not being honest, to pick up out of that net. And then other plastic items that didn't fit into any of the other categories, they made up the 3rd most common items. And then pieces of cardboard and paper was the 4th most common, and then plastic bags was also quite common, and they also actually caused a bit of issues for us. In terms of interesting items, I really enjoy these surveys. It is gross, which I will come to now, but there are really interesting things that we find in the rivers. It feels like a treasure hunt every time we do it. So here you can see we found an old Nokia phone. I think someone said it's a Nokia. It was suggested that we try and put it in rice and see if it still works, but I do not know if it will work. And then we found some license plates. We found 2 license plates actually from cars, and we have a game controller. Also, surprisingly, we've started a weird collection of game controllers. We already have 3 after 3 weeks of surveying, so a very odd thing to be finding in rivers. And then we also found debit cards and identity cards and all sorts of things of personal items. And then also some toys, which are really cool to find, and car parts and everything silly like that. And then we also, the coolest thing we think we found was this 50-year-old pilot's clipboard, which was used in 1973, I think, for pilots as a cheat sheet before they had all of the digital equipment. So in terms of challenges for the nets, it tended to get blocked by the plastic bags. As I mentioned before, they were quite a hassle. So they tend to block the nets, and then that causes flooding. So our sites we purposely chose so that the flooding won't be a risk to anybody nearby. And it does let the water through still, so it just makes a little dam, and then the water can still go through. And also, because of this blockage and the sheer amount of items coming downstream, it also causes, puts a lot of strain on the gear, and that causes breakage and bending of the gear. So one thing that we did with the nets now is that the wire is hooked in on the one side. So once the water rises and the tension increases, then the wire pops off, and that releases some tension, and then the net goes slack, and then it doesn't break as easily. So that's really helped us. Unfortunately, that does lose some of the litter that we trapped, but again, back to feasibility, we would rather keep the nets and get more litter on a different day. And then when I was talking about it being gross, I wasn't lying. Another issue we have is sewage spills, especially at Park and Kales River. This is a photo from yesterday. My poor colleagues were working in this spill yesterday, so thank you to Hannah and the team for being my excuse to not go out yesterday. But also thank you to my colleagues Tana and Tara for doing this for us yesterday. Yeah, that's quite a problem, but we're hoping to solve it soon by working with the municipality. So the lessons we've learned from our very, like I said, our studies that is in the infancy stage still, from our limited experience, is firstly, we would recommend that you prioritize your safety. So we've all gotten vaccinated against waterborne diseases to ensure that we don't get infected with anything. And then waders are essential. You never know what you're going to get in the field. Always plan as if you are going to be working in sewage all day. That's my recommendation. And also wear gloves. And then a very important thing, which I've mentioned a few times, is for us and anywhere that's working with limited resources, whether it be money or time or people, feasibility is much more important than perfection. So we would love to capture all the litter or trash that's coming down the rivers here, but at this point it's just not feasible for us to do so on our own. So the key to that is then collaborations and partnerships and hopefully expansion. But yeah, feasibility is a very important component of these sorts of studies. And that also just ensures that you're able to go on for longer and that you can maintain your trapping devices. And then we've also learned that there's no universal design that works for every condition, so you would really need to get to know your site and your local conditions to see which design would work best for you. And then as you keep learning what things are working, what things aren't working, you adapt and keep trying. So for now, that's what we are doing. We are adapting and continuing to trap trash and collect data in Gqeberha. And then for the way forward, we are wanting to recruit assistants. So we already have arranged volunteers from next week onwards to help us clean the nets. And then we also have interns helping us with that. And then hopefully in the future, we would want to buy flow meters. So for now, we have delayed buying any expensive equipment such as flow meters because this is essentially just a pilot study in this point in time. So if it continues to be successful as it's been up to now, then we would like to get a flow meter and invest a bit of more money in it. At the point now, we are just using precipitation or the amount of rain fallen to standardize and calculate how much litter is coming down the water or down the water streams, water sources and waterways. And then we would also like to, or we will be approaching the local municipality to install and maintain permanent litter traps at key locations. So as I said, the nets and the booms, they do work in some locations and they are successful to a certain degree, but obviously permanent devices that are getting cleaned frequently would be more effective. So essentially, we are removing litter from the rivers, but at this point, our surveys are more important in terms of data collection. So we would really like to make a bigger impact in terms of removing waste from rivers. And then we will also be using the results to raise awareness about plastic pollution in rivers and also how important or how big of a pathway rivers are to for ocean-bound waste into the ocean. And that's it from my side. Thank you so much, everyone.
Ooh, amazing. Thank you so much, Toshka. I think you can stop sharing your screen. You had a lot of comments in the chat, how amazing your presentation is, how easy it was to understand because of all your drawings and everything. So for that. So I will open now for questions. If you have any questions for Toshka, I have some. I know that Toshka has some. If you have questions, please you can type in the chat or you can raise your hands, open your mic, and type. If you don't have a question, I have one. You compared to you have you are working with 2 rivers, right? Correct?
Yes.
Do you have an idea how difference between the 2 rivers, how the difference between waste or litter that you find in the both rivers? Because I know that you mentioned one is in an industrial area and another one is commercial area. Did you see any difference in terms of litter? What types of litter you found?
Yes, so as I mentioned, we have only done 4 weeks of surveys at this point, but already we are noticing the difference in the amount of waste and also the type of trash that we're finding in each river. So oddly, the Parp and Kales, which we expected to be more polluted given the bigger drainage area and just the essentially the demographics or the income level of the area as well, that we haven't really gotten as much trash, but we have noticed things that are related to wastewater treatment plants or wastewater getting into the river. So we found hygiene objects like earbuds, sanitary items, condoms. It's almost guaranteed that you'll find those things every week. So, and then Barkens, which I think is actually quite a good point to make. In that area, we have a higher income and more educated area that drains into it, but we're finding much more waste there. So an issue we have when we're trying to spread awareness of waste is people always pointing fingers and saying, it's not us, it's those people, it's not those people, it's those people. So these kinds of studies just help us show that it's everyone and we can all help to stop the problem.
So we have one question from, I think Sarah, you raised your hand. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Rafa. Thank you, Toshka. That was really incredible. I was scribbling notes the whole time. Very informative. Thank you. My question is just around, and maybe it's too soon to know because you are just about a month in, but has there been curiosity or interest from community members that live near your traps, and do you have plans to kind of install signage, just explaining like what they're about? Have you had any issues with people kind of tampering with the devices?
So I'm laughing because I'm wondering if I should share this piece of information, but we have not had people tampering with it, but we've had some, I don't know if it's one person or more than one person, leave us a not so great present every time we go to the one at Barkens River. So yeah, I won't elaborate more, but so people are seeing it. And but also what we've done is we've chosen remote sites because safety is an issue, and also because we're using metals that are valuable, we're also trying to not draw attention at this point. So we'd rather want to bring attention to the results we're getting than to the actual trashes in the field. And then we do have signage up at the site just to ask members of the public that do come across the nets to please don't clean it and don't remove it. We are doing a study because that's also something we've encountered. People think that we are either catching fish or trying to do something odd with the nets. So yeah, we do have the signage up to just tell them what's happening essentially. But we have had interest. We've shared some things on social media and people are quite keen for this project and people are really keen to help. So hopefully going forward we would get a lot of stakeholders involved and hopefully a few volunteers and companies hopefully helping us as well.
Okay. Thanks so much, Toshka. We are 3 minutes behind our schedule. So thank you so much for your participation. We really appreciate it. We will have more time to discuss later. We will have some breakout rooms so you can speak more about your findings. And now we need to go to the break. So I think we will have only 6 minutes of break. We will be back at 1:35. Is it 1:35 in your country right now? So would be 9:35 for me here. Sorry, Hannah, maybe you can help us with the right timing. But we will have a 5 minutes break, and we will be back after with Hannah, and she will talk about the trash trapping technology. So she will give a talk that discusses several technologies that are used around the world with a focus on low technologies and low cost options. So let's go for the break, and then you can be back in 5 minutes. Is that okay? You can just
turn off your camera, and we'll be here in 5 minutes. Sounds good? Are you all hear me?
Yeah, we heard you, Rafa.
Okay, it's so quiet now that I'm like, okay. Okay, so we'll be back in 5 minutes. Don't turn off, you just come back to here so we can continue our amazing discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
If people are back, can you just give a quick hi in the chat? Just write hi in the chat and we'll know people are back, and then we can go ahead and get started and stay on time. Perfect. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so the next part of today's workshop is I'm going to introduce Hannah Frond, who you've heard from before, so I won't give her a formal introduction. But what she's going to talk about today are the different trash trapping technologies that are out there. So on our website of materials, we have a trash trap directory, and that directory is there basically to guide people on the types of traps that are available, the ones that might be best for their location, as well as might be best for their budget. And Toshka, you got us thinking about nets. I'm not sure nets are currently on that list. So we learn more every day. But Hannah, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you're back, go ahead and turn on your camera, unmute yourself, and load your presentation.
Okay, thanks, Chelsea. I am here. I will share my presentation now.
Looks
okay,
perfect.
Great. So as Chelsea mentioned, I am now going to spend some time summarizing the different trash trapping technologies or some of them that are currently in use around the world. There is a lot of information out there and lots of different types of traps. So hopefully this can kind of summarize it all in a way that's a little bit easier to make sense of all the information. So to start, we've already had us call them trash traps, but they go by many other names. So you might hear them described as trash capture technologies, trash reduction technologies, litter traps, all sorts of names, but they all are different devices that do pretty much the same thing, which is trap trash. So they all, through the network, as Chelsea mentioned, we noticed a need for a kind of source of information, all the different devices that are out there. And so we've developed a device directory. And so in this document, it's kind of a living document that we have. And we add in traps and devices as we hear about them or as we learn about new devices. And we split them into different categories. So we have 7 or 8 broad categories, which I will be going through today. And these include these ones on the slide. So stationary skimmers, booms and barriers, storm drain traps, automotives, vacuum devices, stormwater outflow traps, and then skimmer vessels as well. So when you're thinking about what device might be the right one for you in your project, there are a few things to consider, and some of them are mentioned here. So first is the location. So where are you going to put it? Is your target location a river channel or a lake or a coastal environment or within an urban stormwater system? where you want to put your device is a big factor for deciding what type of trap you need, because they're designed for different locations. Second is if you have a target pollutant. So often the goal is just to capture waste and as much of it as we can, which is absolutely perfect and fine. But some groups might have a specific pollutant in mind. So for example, if you might have a harbourfront with loads of floating microplastics, and for some groups they might want to just target this pollutant, and in that case some devices are better than others at capturing the small particles. The third factor to consider is cost. So obviously there is a cost involved in purchasing materials to make your own trap, or purchasing and maintaining a device from a manufacturer, and the price tag can range from very low cost to more expensive for things such as vessels and trash wheels, and things that have more mechanics. So that's another thing to consider. Fourth is maintenance. So how often does the trap need to be emptied, or more specifically, how often do you want to empty it, or how often can you empty it, depending on your people power and your time availability. Some traps need to be emptied twice a year, some need to be emptied daily, so it really ranges, and you need to choose the right one for you. Fifth is the capacity. So as I just mentioned, some traps need to be emptied more or less often, and often this is to do with how large their collection points are. So some have really large collection points, and these are great situations where maintenance is less frequent. But it does mean that obviously there's a lot of waste to remove once you go and clear out the trap. So it might require more than just volunteers and people with strong arms to take that trash away. You might need a crane or some other infrastructure to help. So for some, that's not an easy option, and so there are smaller devices available that you can have a smaller catch bag that's the size of a trash can, and these are really quick and easy to empty. So that ranges as well. And last but not least is visibility. So do you want your trap to be obvious and something that people can see and look at and use it as a focal point for outreach and education, and have it in a really public area? Or like Toshka mentioned, do you want it to be a little bit more discreet for certain reasons and have it more out of the way and just do its job in the peace and quiet of a more remote location? So there are also things you want to think about, because some traps are very large and obvious and some are slightly less so. So in thinking about these factors, I'm now going to dive into some examples of these devices that are currently in use around the world and how they differ and compare. So first up, we have stationary skimmers. So we use an example of these, which are called sea bins, along the Toronto harbourfront to collect debris in Toronto. These are essentially floating trash cans that can sit on the surface of the water or are mounted to a dock. And they collect floating trash, including often microplastics. They range in cost, and the ones we've experienced so far range from $6,000 to $12,000 US. But because they're often the size of a trash can, they need to be emptied either daily or at the very least weekly, depending on your environment and the amount of trash that's there. But because they are smaller, they're easy to empty. For the example of this sea bin, you can see in the photo there's a handle on the top, and you just take out the catch bag and you empty out the waste, and then you put it straight back in the device. It's very quick and easy. And so they're easy for that, but then they are smaller. So they're often situated around docks. They can be discreet, but often people want to make them more visible because they're in a really public location, and you can use them for education. So people often use signs, or like inspect a sea bin, like I mentioned earlier. He's like pointing towards the sea bin in Tobermory. And there's also some designs that are slightly larger and brighter colors, like the collector in the top left. Next, we have automotives. They are very different to the stationary skimmers, but they have a similar style of trash capture, which is why they're next on the list. So they're kind of similar to skimmers, but they move around. I like to think of them as sort of little floating robots with mouths that eat up floating trash. They're often used in semi-confined waters and along coastlines so that they can be remotely controlled by the users. And because they are remote controlled, they are on the pricier side of the trash traps. Each time the device is used and you bring it back to shore or you empty it, they do tend to get quite high visibility because they are quite cool. So and they're kind of fun for people to watch. So you will very likely have someone come up to you and ask what you're doing when you're using one of these. So they're all things to think about for the automotives. Most of them that exist at the minute are for coastal waters, but there is one in the smallest top right photo called the B-bot that is used along coastlines and sandy beaches. So next up we have stormwater traps. So these are positioned within storm drains and they capture urban debris that is often washed into the drains during rainfall events. They often have either a grate or a catch basin within the drain that can be cleaned and emptied often around 2 to 3 times per year. But this can be more if you have lots of leaves around during autumn or fall. Often they can fill up a bit quicker. Because of their relatively simple design, they're one of the cheaper options for trash traps. And also they're great for different locations because a lot of the manufacturers acknowledge that no storm drain looks the same. So they have these devices designed to be adjustable by size and shape depending on the storm drain basin. And finally, because they are hidden in the ground, they are thought of as low visibility traps, but you can obviously decide to make them more visible if you wish. The gutter bin in the middle photo obviously has a green part to it that draws attention to it. But we've also in Toronto, we've recently installed some litter traps and we've made some little signs that can go by the sidewalk just so people know that they're there and can understand what they're doing. So slightly more industrial version of the storm drain traps are what I refer to as stormwater outflow traps. These include the litter socks that Toshka mentioned earlier. These are often in line, so within the pipes or positioned at the end of a stormwater pipe. And because these a large amount of trash is captured by these devices, they often require a little bit more infrastructure to empty them. So often they'll need a vacuum truck for debris removal, or they'll need a sort of crane to empty all the waste. And this means that annual costs are a bit higher because you need to consider maintenance and payment for debris removal if it's done by an external group. Again, these are often hidden underground, or if they are positioned at the end of a pipe, they're often in a location where not that many people can see them, because obviously those pipes aren't the prettiest to look at. So they do have low visibility, but they can have a really big impact if a lot of waste is entering the environment through those stormwater pipes and through those stormwater systems. So next up, we are on to river traps. So I call these booms and barriers. There's slightly different variations of these, but they're great for collecting floating debris along a river channel. They can be low cost and low tech, as Toshka mentioned as well. And so for that reason, they're a really great option for a DIY trap. If you wanted to test it out, see how it works for your river or your location, they're a great way to do this. Because they're essentially a barrier to stop passing trash, debris removal can be flexible, and so it can be done regularly or less often depending on how much litter you're collecting and how much is building up on one side of the barrier. There are many different versions of these devices. So some are more industrial looking and permanent, like the blue barriers in the bottom right. And others are much more simple, such as the traps that Sustainable Seas Trust are using, and the water goat, which is in the top right, which is very similar design. It's just made from floating buoys with net around it. So these are really, really great. And also included in this, I will add the nets, because they're very similar design, but obviously go slightly below the water surface too. And then on a very similar note again, but with a bit more to them, we have barriers with a collection point. So these work the same as the previous booms and barriers, although collection is directed to a central point with a kind of storage box in the central area. And so because the collection point has a certain capacity, often these do need to be emptied weekly, from what I've been told from different groups using them. But again, it really depends on how polluted the waterway is, the size of the box, and if there's been, for example, a heavy rainfall event, often they fill up really quickly after those sort of weather events. Because these devices are kind of unusual looking, they tend to get a lot of public attention. And so in the example of Mr. Trash Wheel on the bottom right, you can really take advantage of this by adding Frond logos, branding, or even googly eyes like he has. And so he is in Baltimore Harbor. So there are a couple more of him as well now, more than just Mr. Trash Wheel. I think there's Inspector Trash Wheel and Professor Trash Wheel, and they've all got googly eyes, and people seem to love them. So they're a really great example of using trash traps for local education and awareness of the issue. So next, we are on to slightly more industrial types of traps. So vacuum devices are used on land and along coastlines and often work like a vacuum, or I would say a hoover, sucking up litter along their path. So they can capture a lot of heavy items, but the only limitation to them is that they often can't collect anything larger than the vacuum pipe diameter. So they're suited to kind of single-use items and small debris and microplastics. Despite their larger size, they're actually not as expensive as some other devices, and they can collect a lot of trash with each use due to the large storage bins that you can see in each of the photos. So similarly to the automotors I spoke about earlier, these are often man-powered. You'll have someone using the vacuum and walking around with the device, and so that means they're highly visible, so expect a lot of spectators when you're using these. And so finally on the list we have skimmer vessels. So these are boats that work on waterways to trap trash and bring it ashore. They range in cost, similarly to how you'd expect boats and other vessels to range in cost, and their capacity is often as large as the boat hull. And because of their larger size, they are high visibility, but they could also be used offshore. So amongst other boats, they might not get noticed as much as other traps. So if you wanted to, you can do similar thing to the picture in the top left, which is 4Ocean, have a skimmer vessel, and they've painted it a bright blue color and put their branding on it. So there are ways to make these stand out amongst other vessels on the waterway. And so that was a very quick fire round through a lot of information, I know, but luckily we've written it all down for you in our device directory. So we have the device directory as part of the project planning stages. So groups that are interested in starting a project but might want some information about where to start, have a look at all the different devices that are out there, and then narrow down their list. But I also mentioned here, and we'll mention again later, that we also have some other resources that are available that can be used to help with project planning. So the first one is our visual audit protocol. So in addition to thinking about what device you want to use, it's also important to think about the location. So to think about that and where you want to place your device, we have a visual audit protocol. So that allows groups to go along their local waterway and visually count categories of plastic debris and other anthropogenic debris, and then you can collect data on that and then use that to identify the most effective locations for cleanup. So you can do that by where the most litter is, or if you're targeting bottles, for example, you can go to where the most bottles are collecting and try and think about if it's suitable to place your device there. We have the device directory, and then to tie this all together, we also have a project checklist, which I like to think of as kind of a step-by-step guide for successful trash trapping. So it walks you through all the steps that you need to think about for starting a trash trapping project, all the way from the visual audit and the location to the device, to also what kind of stakeholders you might want to involve in the short and long term. For example, who's going to be purchasing the trap, who's going to be maintaining the trap, who will be doing the data collection, and things like that. And all these things are really important to think about right at the very start, to make sure that you've chosen very carefully and have good reasoning behind all your decisions, and this will help your project to be more sustainable in the long term. So I will finish there, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Excellent. Thank you, Hannah. So we have a few minutes for questions. If anyone has questions for Hannah, you can type your question in the chat, or you can go ahead and raise your hand and we'll call on you. There's also been some really nice discussion in the chat. So for those of you that might have your chat lowered, it might be fun to take a peek in there and see what people are talking about.
I'm going to have a
Lots of
look
shared
now.
lessons learned. Any questions about traps? Different types of traps?
Interesting that Melissa, you shared about the community destroying some of the traps. Yeah, that's definitely something that I think we haven't had to, in example of Toronto, we haven't had to think about those sort of things. I think people have tended to, Chelsea, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but nobody seems to have tampered with the sea vents so far. But it's definitely a consideration.
Yeah,
not on purpose.
Boats running into them, but
yeah, see, that's another thing to consider.
But I know with Mr. Trash Wheel in Baltimore, they purposefully have it seated where it is and the access to it where it is, because they have sometimes had issues with people getting onto the actual platform, and like not really taking things, but like putting graffiti on the top, the cover.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dow shares big challenge for us is cost, theft, and fast flowing rivers. So cost, absolutely. And I think that's why it's important to think about some of these different traps. And I liked the use of nets because that seems like something that can be fairly inexpensive. But in a fast flowing river, that might be tough. And so for us, actually, one of the reasons why we weren't successful at getting a trash wheel is there was a lot of concern about the river flowing so quickly when we get really big rains in the Don River. And so the way that they make the trash wheel, I think it does actually rise and fall as the river rises and falls, but there was a lot of concern there. So that was one of the reasons we didn't end up in that river. And then also because of a huge construction project happening now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you have a question about, so in the Gambia, trash is found more on the coastline and are mostly plastic and sewage. What type of trap can be used in this case?
On the coastline and mostly plastic and sewage. That's interesting. So there are a lot of the on land traps are those kind of automotive, I always call them robots, but they're all kind of robots. The kind of automotive devices. They go along the coastline, and then there's also the vacuum devices that are also used along land. And I think some of them can be used on beaches and also rocky shorelines as well. And so they're suitable for different types of coastline. And if it's sewage, I'm assuming that avoiding people coming in contact with it was probably a priority. So potentially the vacuum devices, it might be a good fit. But it really, one thing I didn't mention, which I should probably mention as well, is that it really is location specific. If we've learned anything so far to the Trash Trap Network, it's every location, every group, every scenario has very specific and different considerations. And so one thing that we really want to do with the device directory as well is kind of give everyone the information they need to reach out to the device manufacturers as well, and just have a conversation with them and explain your situation and see if they'll be able to help or guide you in the right direction if it's not with them, if it could be with someone else. We hope that we can help kind of facilitate that as well and get conversations going so people can get as much information as they need.
And then Toshka has a comment about Anna, saying that she's had great success with communicating buy-in litter reduction projects in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and suggesting that people are generally supportive of any such initiatives when they are considerate and transparent. And I think that's an excellent comment. And Toshka, you have your hand raised, so maybe you want to comment more on this, but I think it's really important, I think, to have the education and outreach component so the community has buy-in with the traps and maybe volunteer opportunities. to help use them. Of course, with sewage, we have the same problem. We have one trap where we probably shouldn't have the public sorting the waste there. Toshka, did you have a question or a comment?
Yes, this is a different question. I was wondering, for those vacuuming devices on the beaches, have there been any studies to see what impact they have on the fauna and the sand, on sandy beaches?
Chelsea, you nodded. Do you have an answer straight away?
Well, I can answer it. I was nodding because it's a good question. I'm not sure if there's been a study of people who have researched it. From what I understand about these vacuums, they don't vacuum deep into the sand, and I think they focus in the rack line, where a lot of the stuff that's washed up is sort of dead seaweeds and algae, and then the litter. I don't think they're like digging deep where you have.
So it's a concentrated effort.
Yeah, yeah, because you have total control, right? They're not autonomous.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, that was going to be my answer. I think the fact that you often have someone actually manning the device as they go around, you can avoid anything if there is wildlife around and just target the things that you can see.
You have a question from David. Which device would you recommend for seasonal rivers?
I'm not sure what you mean by seasonal rivers.
I'm guessing you mean rivers that they don't flow all year round. Or in our case, they're frozen for part of the year. So I think it's ones that you can put in and take out fairly easily. We would have had to remove an entire trash wheel every winter, which I think is also a bit of a struggle, but seemed to be something we could do, but it would have been a huge effort. So I feel like this is where booms and nets and easier traps to move, even the litter getter is smaller, might be useful.
Yeah, something that's not such a permanent structure. Probably similar to what Sustainable Seas Trust are using. You can kind of install them, take them out pretty easily. They're not too heavy, and they're not permanent devices. So something, that's not too difficult to move around.
David, did we answer that question correctly? Were you thinking like ephemeral streams that are dry part of the year?
I think it has been answered correctly. I had in mind there's some rivers we are monitoring, especially the Mtopanga River, and it only flows during the rainy season. Then the rest of the dry spell, it doesn't flow. So that's why I asked that question.
Yeah.
No, it's a great question. For us, our bias is to think about winter, but I grew up in the desert in Tucson, Arizona, and we had streams that ran for maybe a month. So excellent. Okay, I think it is 10:01 our time. Sorry, it is a different time for you, but it is our break. So we put in a half an hour break so that
Hello. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good break. Ready for the next half of the workshop?
Hannah, I think you need to, Robyn need to be a co-host, but I cannot.
Oh, I can do that before we begin. Where is she? Okay. Robyn's the co-host now. Okay, we'll just wait one more minute and see if anyone else is coming back from their break before we begin. Okay. Rafa, if you're ready, we'll get started. So this next session in the workshop is going to be led by Rafaela Gutierrez, who's from the U of T trash team, and she'll be talking all about some lessons we've learned so far and some things to consider for trash trapping success. So over to you, Rafa, when you're ready.
Thank you. See, can you see my presentation as supposed to be?
Yeah.
Yes.
Good.
Excellent. Okay. So hi everyone, and welcome to the Recipe for Success session. I'm Rafaela, as Hannah introduced me before. I'm co-founder of the University of Toronto Trash team, and I'm leading our educational program and also helping with the solution-based research program. And among other things, we created and test methodology to collect data from the trash trap device. I would just move it here to the other. So you want a trash trap? To start here, we have outlined a recipe to follow just based on your taste and what you handle. For those of you who are avid bakers, you know you have to follow the recipe to a T in order for the final product to come out perfect. But here, we are just providing you with some rough guidelines to have a trapping process and give you all the opportunity to learn from some of our own mistakes and make notes of some aspects we didn't consider before. So what do you need for a trash trapping?
Led by Rafaela Gutierrez, who's from the U of T trash team, and she'll be talking all about some lessons we've learned so far and some things to consider for trash trapping success. So over to you, Rafa, when you're ready.
Thank you. See, can you see my presentation as supposed to be?
Yeah.
Yes.
Good.
Excellent. Okay. So hi everyone, and welcome to the Recipe for Success session. I'm Rafaela, as Hannah introduced me before. I'm co-founder of the University of Toronto Trash team, and I'm leading our educational program and also helping with the solution-based research program. And among other things, we created and test methodology to collect data from the trash trap device. I would just move it here to the other. So you want a trash trap? To start here, we have outlined a recipe to follow just based on your taste and what you handle. For those of you who are avid bakers, you know you have to follow the recipe to a T in order for the final product to come out perfect. But here, we are just providing you with some rough guidelines to have a trapping process and give you all the opportunity to learn from some of our own mistakes and make notes of some aspects we didn't consider before. So what do you need for a trash trapping? If you're here at our workshop, it's mostly likely you know you have a trash problem in your area. You take walks along the lake, coast, or river and see there is trash accumulating everywhere. This may well be a hotspot and a great place to put a trash capture device. But there is something else to consider prior to just putting it in the first place you see where the garbage ended up. And we will discuss this here today. You should access your watershed. This will allow you to gain an understanding of where the litter is coming from, what sources are, and what types of plastic waste or litter are you most commonly seeing. You must identify this in order to optimize on the location for your trash capture device to capture and remove it from your waterways. Depending on your region, there might be multiple sources, whether it's a river, creek, or it might be due to high population density on that water body, in which you will have to emphasize the community outreach aspect in your trash trapping project to encourage behavior change, as some of you mentioned during the chat before. Within your watershed, there will be sources, hotspots, transports, and sinks, and we would talk about that. Source points are always a priority to place a trash capture device, as they will catch and remove the litter before it further pollutes the watershed. And sites of plastic transport are usually clear pathway of where plastic moves from one point to another rivers, and rivers are a great example of this. Hotspots are where the trash tends to accumulate at large rates, but it's not its final destination. So if left untouched, it will continue to travel through the watershed after a big storm, for example, or due to current and winds. Sinks are when it's the endpoint for litter, where it often gets accumulated and doesn't move locations easily. Each of these possible locations of plastics we just discussed it, often overlap. Sites of transport can be hotspots. Hotspots could also be sinks, for example. These general definitions are just to help you understand the fate of plastic pollution and to understand when placing a trash capture device in a region, tackling any and each of these will still make an impact. You will also need to understand what types of conditions you have in your water body. Is there a lot of aquatic vegetation? What are the winds and water currents like? Taking note of the seasons in your region, for example, does your water body become frozen over, as Chelsea was mentioned here in Canada? This will help you think about what device may be more feasible. Another important note is, does your water body have the infrastructure for trash capture device? If so, what type of device can your water body hold? For example, we, the University of Toronto trash team, I think Chelsea mentioned that before, we want to place a Mr. Trash Wheel here in our harbor front, but due to all the construction that's been done near a large source point of litter to the harbor, it was not possible for us that time. So to understand these different sites and conditions in your area, you can try and Google local NGOs in your area to see if they have published watershed assessment or reported certain outflows of litter from a certain point. Look for a watershed assessment model for your region. You can look for a watershed assessment model for your region. This might be provided by your local government to help you understand water flow in your watershed and can help you identify potential sources, points, hotspots, transports, and sinks. Researchers are also working hard and developing models to predict surface transport of plastic pollution to identify where they are accumulating the most, given the wind and current patterns. But until that, it's more widely available, and if there is no open data available to you from local volunteer groups or a watershed assessment tool, we have developed an easy method to determine where to place your device and get the most bang for your buck. So we have our visual audit, but what is a visual audit? You will visually observe the litter present in a water body by recording the types and amount of litter you see in your local water body. You can conduct this a few times through the year or season to understand how litter accumulates and changes depending on the season or after a rainfall. This will also help you inform on the type of device you should be considering. For example, should it be mobile or stationary, as Hannah mentioned before? This protocol will be found, and this protocol will be found in our website, and included your research, and we will send to you later after this workshop with the resource package given after this. So next, create your dream team. From early presentations, we heard from Chelsea, for example, how engaging with multiple different stakeholders, and this can lead to successful projects. So how do you create your own dream team? You want to identify first of all, you want to identify your local stakeholders in your area, in your region. This might be a marina, local government, volunteer cleanup groups, NGOs, business along the water, fishermen, or any other avid waterway users. It can be anyone that is really willing to do something. As there are many economic and social implications with plastic pollution, ensure to sell the benefits of the trash capture device, as it will help restore the water body to what it was once, and it's a long-term solution. So selling your product, selling the importance of your project, it's really important. As you begin to bring together all local stakeholders in this project, make it reach as many people as possible and help it grow. As it was mentioned in the chat, we need to involve community as well. In your trash trapping project, ensure everyone feels they have a significant part in the initiative. Ensure you have enough stakeholders motivated to collaborate in this project, as there are many roles to play. The first is the operator. Who knows how the device functions? Who can fix it when something goes wrong? Who has machinery to remove and deploy the trash capture device if needed? Who can help assess the best points of placement and help identify technical issues? So you need to find this role in your project, the operator. Next is who will maintain the trash trap device. Those who maintain it will be cleaning it out daily, or however often the debris needs to be removed and maintained, and ensure everything is functioning properly. Next thing, it's your waste characterization team. Who will collect the data, the daily data, using our simple data protocol, and who will collect the data using our detailed protocol, which requires quantification and characterization of the litter 5 to 10 times a season or a year. Who will compile the data to send it to the trash trap network? So you need to think about your team, and waste characterization team is also really important to make sure that you have a successful project. Lastly, identify who will work on communicating the project to your local community and organize outreach events or any other opportunities around the device. Who will help create signage, tell the story to your local community about this project. This is really, we will discuss communication later, but this is also very important. We need to have a group that is focused on communication, how we will connect with our community. So once you complete your watershed assessment and create your dream team, pick the device together. What seems to be the best device for you? Think about the environment you are in. Do you get snow and ice? What type of aquatic organic materials present in your area, for example? What's the weather like in your area? These are important considerations that we already said, but you need to pay attention for the maintenance and storage of your device. Once you pick the device you think is best, and Hannah share a couple of examples, and you have an idea of where you want to place the device in your region, do you have the capacity to operate it? Does it need an external energy source? Can you provide this? Do you have a reliable form of labor to maintain the device over time? Based on the capabilities of your team, would you benefit more from a manual or autonomous device? Devices with larger holding capacity require less frequent collection, whereas smaller devices require more attention and collections depend on how polluted the area is, of course. It is important to remember the fit for purpose statement, and I think Hannah presented already this. We want to emphasize that having a trash trap device, no matter the size, will still make a measurable difference, and this is really important. Now, you have your team and ideal device. It's time to think about funding. What can you and your team afford? Many of the cheaper devices are valued around $10,000 or less, but this does not include maintenance or operational costs. Does someone in the team have a machinery if required to deploy and retrieve the trash trap device? You have to put your heads together to try and identify funding sources and plan for long-term maintenance, because this will require, you have to be strategically thinking long-term solutions. If there is little to no funding, but volunteers are available, you and your team could consider manual debris collection efforts and use low-cost device. Examples of these include booms, litter traps, or even do-yourself trash trap device, as we saw today as a brilliant example. So we need to get creative in order to have a trash trap device. Lastly, ensure you utilize your device to the fullest extent. It's important to recognize that this is not only a technology that removes the litter, but it can be used as a research tool and act as a centerpiece for educational and outreach to engage your local community in a collaborative initiative. And by engaging the public, you can bring in awareness to solutions that individuals can have starting at home, for example, and educate them on the common sources and types of plastic that litters our waterways. Studies have shown that when outreach is partnered with innovation in waste management, the plastic waste reduction is increased more versus when it's just innovation with no outreach. So outreach is central if you want a successful project. And we will discuss this in more details later. So this recipe has been created for many different attempts and is still going to need tweaks and adjusting throughout the years as we discover new ingredients needed to make this as successful as possible with your help. So we are still learning every day. We are learning. Thus far, some of the things we realized we need to add and think about are, so we will show now. Maintaining roles and responsibilities. We learned that it's extremely important that everyone have their set roles and take responsibility for what they are assigned, or else the project is not as effective as intended. So if you have to find the roles and people need to be accountable for that. Make sure you maintain relationships with your team so that everyone's held accountable for their part. Establishing these roles will make the process much smoother and fun in the end. Next is identifying and recognize your native vegetation. We found that vegetation can damage our trash capture device easily if left unmaintained for a long period of time. And due to some local vegetations like pine tree, for example, as their needles were were small enough to breach the mesh, causing damage to the pump. So placing the device far from these trees would help avoid the issue. So pay attention to the vegetation, pay attention what happened in your area. This will avoid you to have problems. Lastly, we found in the fall, we had some dead fish accumulated in the bins. If this occurs, keep an eye in the area. We realized it was unlikely our device caused this, as the fish can swim out the current that the pump creates, and it was most likely due to poor water quality instead. But you have to pay attention, and that this may not be the case for other devices, so it's really important to note. And if this occurs more than once, you may consider move your device to another area to avoid an impact to aquatic organisms, because that's exactly the opposite that we want to achieve. So this is the recipe to create a successful trash trapping project. And thank you so much. So now I want to open the floor to all of you. And if you have questions, I'm here to answer. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Rafaela, for sharing all of that. It seems like people.
Hannah, you were
Sorry,
muted.
I was muted. Thanks, Rafa, for your presentation. It seems like everyone really enjoyed it and thinks there's really lots of useful information for everyone to take away. So we will definitely be sharing that afterwards. So yeah, we have just under 10 minutes. If anybody would like to ask a question to Rafaela or discuss anything that Rafa mentioned throughout her slides, then we have some time for that now.
So while we don't have questions, I have a comment. So I think when you are creating your project, it's a learning curve, and you are always learning something new. So it's nice to see other example, what works with other groups and challenge, so you don't make the same mistakes, and you make new mistakes, and you learn from that. So it's really important we share what we are learning and share what didn't work for us, and so other people can outcome this and learning too.
Definitely. And that's why we formed, part of the reason why we wanted to form the network, right? So that groups could have those connections with each other, and we have opportunity to share all those lessons with each other, and ask questions if we want advice from other groups that have might done similar things. It's all helpful. Okay, I'm trying to keep track of the chat. Everyone's just saying it was great, Rafa. So thank you.
Yeah, I saw that. Yes, so Michelle, we will record, and you can watch as many times as you want, and you can share with your network and other groups later on. And sorry if I talk too fast.
You were great, don't worry. Okay, we'll wait a couple more minutes in case anyone has any questions, but we are due to have another quick break now, just before we go into the final set of presentations for the end of the workshop. So we were aiming to break at the hour, but we can break a couple of minutes early.
Okay, looks like people are coming back in. So the next part of our workshop is taking a bit of a deeper dive basically into some of those parts that Rafaela discussed. So Rafaela went into detail about kind of the nitty-gritty of trash trapping. And then what we're going to do is sort of go into the nitty-gritty and detail on those details. So we'll go into in depth about some of the different parts. So I'll sort of walk you through what each of those are. Instead of going into breakout rooms, we'll actually stay in here. But the goal of these 3 sessions back to back, which each one is a half an hour, is for us to sort of go into detail about some of these ingredients of trash trapping, and then to be able to have a discussion. So we encourage discussion and participation, which has been awesome already in the chat. So thank you all so much. So the 3 parts within this session, first, we'll talk about ownership and operation, which is really key in order to have a successful trash trap. This involves a lot of the questions people were asking about the different types of traps, plants and wildlife. I think some people were asking about traps getting vandalized or parts getting stolen, things that break, that type of thing. And so this will be a session with myself, Hannah, and Toshka, who you've seen before. Then the next session is going to be all about the data collection and the research, which is incredibly important to inform upstream solutions and also to be able to measure our impact. And so this session will be led by Sarah Kollar at the Ocean Conservancy, Rafaela Gutierrez, who you've seen today, and Britta Baechler, who's also at the Ocean Conservancy. And then last but not least, there will be a session on outreach and communication, which is also incredibly important in order to increase waste literacy and have buy-in from the community on the work that we're doing, and hopefully to be able to inform upstream solutions so that eventually we don't need so much cleanup because we don't have so much litter going out into the environment. And so this will be led by Robyn Stegman and Madeline Black, who are both at Ocean Conservancy. And fun fact, Robyn was actually the person who was the original Twitter person behind the Twitter handle for the trash wheel. So she's one of the original trash trapping teams. And so here's how the session will run. We'll have 30 minutes of ownership and operation, 30 minutes of data collection and research, and 30 minutes for outreach and communications. Truett will make sure that we stay on time. And then at the end, we'll wrap up by talking about what were some of the key points that people learned or any final questions that people have that are sort of overarching across the 3 topics. So without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and we'll jump into the first part of this session, which is on ownership and operation. And so that's Hannah, back to you to share your screen, and then Toshka and I are also going to be part of that panel.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Share my slide. Okay, does it all look good?
Looks great.
Okay, so the first session, as Chelsea mentioned, is ownership and operation. So I'm going to be walking us through the slides. Then I wanted to talk throughout with Chelsea and Toshka to share their experiences from their own trash trapping projects about all the things that we'll be discussing. So you've already met all of us now. So we will be your facilitators throughout this session, and you can ask us any questions that you have at the end of the slides. Okay, so I wanted to start, we're going to go through all these different things, but I wanted to start by asking a question to the group, which you can respond to in the chat, which is, in your different scenarios, who would you expect or intend to purchase the trash trapping device in your different scenarios? And I've lost the chat, so Chelsea, you might have to keep an eye on it. It's disappeared from my screen. Oops.
Still pretty quiet in the chat. Maybe people are thinking about it. I can share for us. Who has purchased our devices has been a combination of Ports Toronto, the local airport within the harbor. I think the Toronto Zoo purchased one. So it's kind of been a combination of different industry groups buying the traps, and then Ports Toronto operating them and owning them, and us characterizing them. So it's a collaboration, which I think is important because not every group can afford many traps.
Mm-hmm.
And Sean adds ourselves within the company who install the traps. So no external buyers at this point.
Yeah. Toshka, for your scenario, who was the group that purchased the traps for the materials? We can't hear you for some reason. You are not on mute. Don't worry, we've got time.
You can type it in the chat for now if you want. One thing I forgot to mention about ours is that all of our litter traps were purchased by the city, so government.
Mm. I'm assuming you're going for the typing option. Yeah, it's fine. No worries at all.
And for anyone else who maybe doesn't have a trap and is considering a trap, then I guess a question would be, do you see opportunities for people who might be willing to purchase, or would you need to look for seed funding and grants and those types of things? Mm-hmm. Toshka says, Sean is a coworker and we purchase ourselves at this point.
Got it. Yeah, I should have thought that. Okay. So the reason I ask it is because there is, obviously, as you just mentioned, there's lots of different ways that it can happen and lots of different stakeholders. And Rafaela mentioned this too earlier in her presentation just before the break. So there are lots of different, who purchases the materials or the device is one thing, but then there's also lots of different other stakeholders to consider as well, who could be involved in ownership and operations. So who will purchase the device, who will be maintaining the device, will that same person or group be responsible for the data collection once they remove the litter and the trash from the device? Is there certain groups or people, certain members of the public that you'd like to target for education or engagement locally? Are there any organizations that can help you with this, or that you think would really like to be involved in the project in terms of ownership and having responsibility for the trap? And then some other last couple of ones which we'll touch on in a bit more detail later is, are there any groups that the installation of the device will affect? Is it in a certain area where it's used by other groups or waterway users or members of the public? And what was mentioned in one of the questions earlier as well, one of the comments was about permissions and any permissions or legislation or anything like that is or local laws that need to be considered or followed or thought about before you go ahead with device installation. So they're just a few examples of those sorts of questions. And so to follow up on what I just spoke about, here's a list of some stakeholders that might need to be involved in a trash trapping project. So it ranges from governments to local ports authorities to waterway users to the general public to there's a lot of different options. There's one that's actually missing on this list, which I think is an important one to add, which is the device manufacturers or the companies that are making and distributing these devices, because we've noticed definitely there's a keen interest for them to be involved in and collaborate with groups who are looking to use their technologies for things such as this. So not only cleanup, but also education and awareness and data collection. So often they're really keen to actually be more involved than just providing the device. So they're happy to promote and be involved in other ways too. So they're also important to consider. And Toshka, I missed your comment in the chat. So with the results and awareness from our surveys, we hope to be able to recruit companies and people to donate or purchase devices. So yeah, exactly what I was just mentioning. So it all works, kind of comes around full circle, and can also be helpful for future work and expanding projects too. Okay, so beyond who is going to be involved, there are a few things to plan for in terms of what the project requires for installation. So when you plan for your installation of your trash trap, there are three main elements where you need to focus. So one is knowing and understanding the site, and Rafaela dug into this earlier with the explanation of what watershed considerations and information you might need to know. Knowing and understanding the device is the second thing. And third is remembering that installation is not the end of the process, as we've had a great example from Toshka earlier. You have to think ahead, and when the product is in use, you might need to adapt and adjust accordingly depending on what happens once it's actually in the water or in the environment and doing its job. So in thinking about where you're installing it, Rafael's already touched on this, but I'll just go over it briefly again. So we have the checklist, which includes the visual audit protocol, which is a method that groups can follow if they choose to identify litter accumulation hotspots in your local waterway. And so here is just an example of where the sites that we analysed in Toronto for the visual audit protocol, and we compared different slips along the harbour front to determine which site would give us the best bang for our buck for cleanup. And so we chose to measure it by the count of anthropogenic debris here, but you can also do this by weight if your goal is to capture as much weight as possible, or again, as I mentioned earlier, if you've got a specific type of debris that you want to focus on, you can adjust the visual audit methods just to focus on that one type of debris. So say you just really want to get all the microplastics in a certain area, or all the bottles that are collecting in a certain part of the river. You can just focus on those to find your hotspots to put your trap in. And so in carrying out the visual audit protocol, thinking about more broadly about the location where you want to install the device, and it can highlight issues that you may not have considered before. So local wildlife, sensitive species, invasive species. So the trash trap might have multiple benefits in removing not only trash, but also any species that you might not want in that environment. It's also important to consider what sort of boat activity you might have at the site. Will you need to consider vessels passing by the device or past the device, whichever one you choose. And then also, will you have access to the site all season? So we've mentioned earlier, like different countries have different weather changes. We get frozen over during winter in Toronto. And some areas also have droughts in certain times of the year and no water passing through. So that's one thing. And also, if it's in a certain location that's either public or restricted, will you actually be able to get to the device throughout all year? Is there certain times of year where you won't have access? And do you need permissions for this? And who do you need to contact? So I'll stop again here and just ask Chelsea and Toshka for their perspectives on their local installations. So did you have to ask for permission for anyone to install your traps? And are there other users of the waterway that you contacted or considered in the process? And whoever wants to go first can go for it.
Toshka, do you want to go first?
Can you hear me now? I'm trying my luck now.
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so as you mentioned, we have to consider safety for our staff. And then for the environment, so as I said, at Park and Kale, the One River, it's completely modified. There aren't any fish or anything there that we need to worry about, that we might be blocking any route travel or dispersal. And at Barkins, we don't have any recreational activities really. So we luckily then don't have to consider any boats or things like that might interfere, or that the boom might interfere with. And yeah, and then just in terms of accessibility, as you mentioned, and for us also remoteness was also an aspect that we considered, just to try and get the valuable materials out of sight, so that we can ensure that the booms are still there the next week we go back.
Great. We half lost you at the end. You've gone quiet, but I think I caught it. I concentrated.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Don't worry about it. Thank you for your insight. Chelsea, you can share your thoughts too, if you like.
Sure. So I think the biggest thing for us in the city of Toronto has been permission. When we first we're interested in a trash wheel, getting permission from the government and trying to figure out who, whether it was parks or waste management or Toronto Water, which part of the city, the Port Authority, would actually be responsible for permissions. And sometimes they'd like point fingers at others, and then we'd get permission, or they'd say, or no, sorry, they would say, we can't give you permission, go to this person, and that person would direct us back to that person. So that's been a barrier to getting work in rivers here, but we're hoping to be able to do this soon at another site, which doesn't have, is not navigable waters. So we have to work in places where you don't have boats, which limits us also to the certain rivers that we can use, depending on the trap that we would want. So the slips became the obvious place for permission because Ports Toronto owns them and could say yes or no. And so then the visual audit came into play to figure out which slips. And I think, Hannah, you mentioned something like in terms of not just how much you collect, but what you collect. So this year we're having conversations of whether we stay in the slips with combined sewage overflow or whether we want to avoid that. We use gloves, we protect ourselves, we capture a lot. So we're kind of inclined to stay, but obviously it's gross and presents an extra challenge. But it does mean we collect a lot of debris that would otherwise go in the lake. And then with the Litta traps, which are the underground in the storm drains, again, that was getting permission from the city. For some reason, that was easier. And I think there's only one group that owns the storm drains. And so it was it was much easier to get permission from Toronto Water. So, and they've been great partners. So I guess for us, the biggest lesson is the amount of litter and what you're collecting, but really stakeholders and permissions.
Nice. Yeah, I totally forgot to mention there's lots of things you might want to target, but there's also things you might want to avoid capturing, like, well, maybe fat bags we want to capture and get them out of there, but they're not that nice to handle. So, yeah. Okay, thank you both.
Sorry, just from outside as well with the permission. So we had to get permissions to work in the rivers as well, because anytime, essentially also because we spanning our device over the entire river, so whenever you coming over a river, there's a risk of flooding. So we had to apply for permits to install semi-permanent devices into rivers, and then we had the same issue that Hannah mentioned, that they tried to hand it off to someone else. So the issue here was that one branch of the municipality works within rivers, and then as soon as you take something out of the river and put it on the riverbank, that's another branch. So they were passing it back and forth, saying, no, this is you guys, no, this is you. So that contributed to the 2-year waiting period. And for that reason, a lot of organizations just do it without permission. So I wouldn't recommend doing that, because we also want to work closely with the municipality.
Yeah.
Sorry, is this from me? Can you guys hear my audio?
There's a lot of feedback, so I've turned you way up to hear you, so I don't know what that is. Sounds a bit like you're underwater.
I'm sorry. I don't know what went wrong. I'm using the same equipment as earlier. I lost my train of thought. But yeah, we don't need permission, so I do recommend just checking if permission is required, and rather don't go rogue. Yeah, you don't want to make any enemies or break any law. And then also, sorry, in terms of things you don't want to capture, so the sites we chose are also useful in terms of avoiding or reducing the possibility of a lot of organic matter washing into the lakes. So in the Balkans River, lower down, there's more, okay, better, okay. Thank you to our tech genius, Tara, for helping me. But yeah, so at the Balkans, the previous site, there was a lot of risk for big branches and basically any sort of vegetation to wash into the nets, and they contributed to one of the booms breaking initially. So the new site, which is just, as you said, downstream from a stormwater canal, we only get leaves and things that are washing in from the streets. So it does help to consider those factors as well, especially if it's going to be big things that might damage your trap.
Excellent. Okay, the next step here is know your device. And so here, the key message is do your homework. There are lots of options, which you heard from Hannah when she went over the different types of trash traps and what we have in our directory. And then, of course, plan thoroughly for device arrival and installation. So in terms of knowing your device and doing your homework, there are a lot of different traps out there, and deciding on the right one is really important for long-term success. And so, as we mentioned, we have a device directory, which can help point out some of the traps that are out there. But of course, we haven't found them all. And there are some people who do kind of a do-it-yourself trash boom. So I don't know, Toshka, whether your net was marketed as a trash trap or not. But also in Vietnam, we work with the MCD, who's a nonprofit there, and they've created their own traps from scratch. And so that may be a good cost-effective way, or it may be the best way to find kind of the best trap for your location. And so then whatever device you start using, you get to know it really well, and you get to know kind of the things that happens that might cause it to break and how you fix it and the extra parts that you might need to do. So sometimes the first year is a bit of a struggle in just getting to know the trap and the best way to empty it, etc. And so it's really important, I think, to think about the best trap for you in terms of the location, also the technology. And I think it's good to get your hands on the device. So if you're actually able to talk to somebody else who already has that device, if you're buying a device, sometimes to have the manufacturer come to a site visit, or maybe they can give you the device to play with before you purchase it. Sometimes that is possible. It never hurts to talk to the vendor and ask whether or not they can do that. And then to understand for the traps, the types of electricity they may or may not need, making sure you have that electricity in place, how often you might need to do maintenance. The C-bins we empty daily, the Lita traps we empty monthly. Toshka, how often do you have to service the net in the river or the boom?
So depending on the efficiency of the device, for the booms, we didn't capture as much. A lot of it was missed by the boom, so we went, it's also depending on whether it's raining or not. We went once every 2 weeks if it wasn't raining, and if it does rain, then if it's a big rainfall event, then we go as soon as we can. And if it's just normal downpour, then we go once a month. And for the nets, we've been doing it for a month now, and it's been raining, so we've been taking credit for ending the drought in Kollar because since we installed the nets, it's been raining every week. So yeah, we go in once a week with the nets as well.
Yeah, and those are all really good points, because it's not just the types of trap, but also the seasonality of it, right? Sometimes it's weekly, sometimes it's bi-weekly, sometimes it's monthly. And then also, of course, the size of the trap will determine how much they can hold before you do indeed have to empty it. And for example, for a C-bin, if you don't empty it when it's full, it kind of weighs down the pump and can actually cause harm to the trap. So it's important to think about all of the different things that are relevant to how the device actually functions, and then also whether or not you are allowed to service the trap. So in Toronto, with the Lita traps, we can't open the storm drain, so the city has to be available. Toshka, did you have another comment?
Yeah, sorry. Now that you mentioned what the nets were marketed as, I thought it might be useful to share that it depends obviously on the mesh size that you want. So we try to get something as close as possible to 2.5 centimeters, which is what we're using for our beach surveys and surveys on land as macro litter. But the closest we got was 4.5 centimeters, and then we wanted something a bit bigger to trap bigger items. So we ended up using, I think the one was the tennis net. The company that makes tennis nets here, we got nets from them, custom made. And then the other net, the bigger mesh size, was for pool covering. So yeah, you can just make sure that it's a sturdy material. So we have synthetic nets. There's a reason plastic is so popular. So yeah, just make sure that it would be able to withstand the conditions it's working in, and essentially you can work with anything that's made strong enough and that has the dimensions that you're looking for.
Super useful. Yeah, and I think the DIY trash traps are really nice because you can cater to your ecosystem and cater to what you're trying to capture. And probably it's less expensive. The C bins have now been marked up even more, and it's a kind of a different type of product. And then there's some other products out there that are similar, and they can be quite expensive. But the other thing to note with that is a lot of these companies that are creating these trash traps are pretty new. And so they're often willing to collaborate and either gift a device or give a pretty hefty discount to get them operating in other parts of the world. So the DIY options are great for a lot of reasons, but if you are looking for something massive in terms of a trash trap or something that already exists, you can always look to those options. The Lita traps and the things that go in storm drains, I find to be really cost effective. Anything else on installation and knowing the device? Otherwise, I'll go to the next slide. And we have Hannah back.
Yeah, sorry everyone. My Zoom kicked me out.
No problem. We seamlessly carried on.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on is one final thing to note, I guess, is getting to know the product in practice. So once you install it, the process doesn't end there, as we all know. So in addition to ensuring installation goes smoothly, it's great to check in periodically on the device once it's installed. That way you can see how it functions, check on any mechanical issues or like physical issues with the device that might need fixing, and identify where they might be coming from and find a solution. And earlier Toshka gave us a really great example of that with like checking. I think you mentioned when it first installed in the pilot phase, you checked on your nets once a week. I think that's what you said. Yeah. So, and then you adjusted and you allowed the net to go slack and things like that. So that's a really good example of that sort of process. And so I also wanted to note here as well, like one good thing to note here is that we hope that the troubleshooting process will become easier for groups in the network as we grow. We have more different groups around the world using a variety of different devices, so we will have more collective experience in that process, and we can share our lessons learned as we have today, and also just speak with each other and connect about different things so that we don't have to deal with these issues alone, hopefully, as time goes on. So we're all in it together to help each other out. Okay. So once your device is installed and you have it working properly, it's time to think about long-term maintenance and operations. So often groups will choose to install a device in a public location, which is great for education and outreach opportunities, but it leads to further considerations about who has access to the site or if there are any threats of vandalism or theft. And so your considerations could be, how easy is it for people to access the device in the water? Is it close to the riverbank? Is it further out? Does it have any valuable parts that might be subject to theft? How can you best protect your device from these situations? So, for example, moving it into a slightly less public location or somewhere that you need certain access to reach the device. And then in addition to keeping the device safe, you also need to make sure that the people who need to get to the device can actually do this easily. So that involves, again, communication between different stakeholders about who will be accessing the device and when, for maintenance and data collection, and obviously ensuring that they have everything they need and a really clear plan for how often the device will be emptied, who is doing this, and what will happen to the waste once it's removed from the trap. Sure, it's given me a 5-minute warning, so I'm going to keep moving. Thank you, Stuart. So in the example of Toronto on our C-bins, we had a clear maintenance and data collection plan in partnership with Ports Toronto. So the U of T trash team, we worked together throughout the summer to empty the bins and collect and characterize the waste. And this really works for us because we have the people power to do this and to go in and collect data. I think it's daily. It was daily this summer, I think. So we had that many people that were able to do that for us, which was fantastic. But for other groups, it might mean that it might be a collection between different organizations. So it might not be the same group doing the data collection and maintenance every time. It might not, the data collection portion of it, we know that sometimes time is limited and you might not be able to do a deep dive of your waste every time you empty the device. And it really depends on your people power, your funding, and your goals for data collection and research. So whatever the situation might be, it's important to consider the individuals carrying this out, and for them to know the importance of the data collection, that it's a long-term commitment. For monitoring, we need lots of data over a long period of time. It gives us the best opportunity for really understanding what happens, where the waste comes from, and how this might change throughout the year, and then what we can do about it. And then by thinking thoroughly about data collection, who'll be doing it, how often, and what methods you'll use, it will make the process more efficient for everyone and ensure it runs smoothly and sustainably for a long time. And I should note here as well that we mentioned earlier that we have the protocols, the ITTN waste characterization protocols that groups can use, and these were developed using the CBINs. But we also hope to still have groups within the network that might not necessarily be following these protocols exactly, but still have comparable data between all the different groups in the network. So if you're collecting data using a set protocol, like Toshka mentioned, they have the marine litter protocols. That is actually great. We love that people are following these and having harmonized data with other groups, and we just hope that we can also kind of find a way to combine all these data together and have a network of trash trap data that is useful and harmonized. Okay, and finally, so as you've heard, there's much more to owning a device than just installation and occasional emptying. Things to consider is that installation may include electrical installation costs, tools, materials, staff time. Maintenance must be done either daily, weekly, or monthly, and it requires equipment again, staff time again, and potentially purchase of other materials to help us understand what's being trapped and to characterize the waste. In addition to this, your consumables might include energy consumption, garbage bags, replacement parts for equipment, and daily maintenance costs. And also, it's often waste disposal can come with costs, both financially and potentially environmental. So we've touched on this earlier, but thinking about where the waste goes, if you have a particularly large device that's capturing a large amount of trash, you might need to have a process in place for collection with your local municipality, because it might be too much to just capture it and put it in the local waste bins. And so that is another thing to consider, what you're going to do with your waste. Are you going to try and recycle some of it if you can? We would obviously encourage this, but we also know that a lot of the waste that's in water and might have been there for a long time, it's also often not recyclable. So making sure that actually goes to landfill and gets taken to the right place is also really, really important. And so it might feel like a lot, and we've just spoken about a lot of different things to consider, but we think it's worth it for the benefits that come with trapping trash. So in addition to removal of trash, there are other benefits. Certain traps can also clean up small oil spills. The sea bins have an absorbent filter that can do this. They can help collect stray fishing line and plant species that might otherwise get entangled in boat propellers. There's invasive plant species that you might want to collect in addition to trash. Am I going over time? Probably. And then they can also assist you in obtaining green certifications and also having data and proof that you're doing great things that you can use to your advantage for other projects, and can show that you're making a positive difference in your local area. And importantly, they contribute to research by measuring our impact and informing local source reduction and solutions for plastic pollution. So I want to finish with one last question, and then we can kind of head into a little bit of discussion before we close. And that is for the groups that are here that don't have trash traps yet, or already do even. What is the main reason why you want a trash trap, or you would like a trash trap?
And while people answer, Toshka, do you want to say what made you originally do this, and then we can follow with what made us do it, although we sort of said earlier.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we initially started with beach surveys. So we are part of a regional monitoring program in East Africa where we're doing beach surveys. And we started noticing every time after it rains, we're getting a lot of litter on the beaches, and it's coming from the land. So we could tell that it's coming from the nearby rivers. So that was the obvious next step to go, to stop it there so that we don't have to pick it up on the beaches.
So an urgency over cleanup. And I think for us, we were excited about the possibility of it being a centerpiece for outreach and education. So clearly there was a lot of litter in the area, but Ports Toronto was sometimes using these boats to clean it up, although not very effectively. So they were interested from we need to get the litter out of the water perspective. But for us, we were pretty excited about the outreach and education.
Mm-hmm.
Any other answers to this question in the chat before Truett kicks us out of this session? And Toshka, any final thoughts that you want to add on any of those last slides, the lessons learned that are relevant to those few things?
I think you covered everything very well. It seemed like we had a lot of similar experiences. So yeah, it's definitely, it shouldn't be a daunting task, but it is hard work. I don't want people to think it's going to be easy and glorious and glamorous. It can often be dirty work and it's hard work, but it's very rewarding work. So I do recommend that people start getting traction to their systems and that we start working together or continue to work together to really stop waste at source and renew.
Yeah.
Agree.
Great.
I think that's a great way to finish our session.
Okay, I will stop sharing my screen. And then I think next up we have data collection with Sarah and Rafaela and Britta.
All right, thanks everyone. I am going to start sharing my screen. So please give me just a moment. All right, let's get started with session B, which is the data collection and research bit. So as everyone has said, thank you all for joining us. In this session, we're going to talk in more detail about the importance of data collection. But first, I will introduce you to myself and the two other speakers for this session. My name's Britta. I work for Ocean Conservancy, and my job is to work on all things science and research related to our plastics program. I'm really fortunate in that I get to work with different programs within Ocean Conservancy, like our International Coastal Cleanup and Global Ghost Gear initiatives, and also with our wonderful network that we're talking about today, the ITTN. Like I said, I have two incredible colleagues joining me in the session today, Rafaela Gutierrez and Sarah Kollar. We're really pleased to be here today talking about the importance of data collection, and we will talk you through how to do it using our existing protocols. So just what we're going to cover today, why is it important to collect harmonized data, not just data, but data in a harmonized, consistent way, and how can we collect those data? So we'll start here. Why is data collection important? So as we all know now, trash capture devices serve not only to collect debris in the environment, but also to collect data. These data can then be used for scientific purposes to support evidence-based research. They can also, and actually have been used then, to inform policies and create preventive regulations. They can also be used for education and outreach, raising awareness at all levels, from local communities to state, national, and even global levels as well. And last, it can be used to inspire imagination and to push for solutions to the plastic pollution problem in communities around the world, just like many of you are already working to do. So we've learned today about trash capture devices, but we'll talk in this session about how these devices are actually really important scientific tools. So these devices collect debris in a standardized way. They can be used to quantify and characterize the actual items in terms of their category, as well as the amount of debris in terms of weight that are captured and ultimately diverted from the environment. We can also learn more about not only what's captured in the devices, but also how effective those devices are for capturing different sizes of debris, from very small microplastics, depending on your device, all the way up to these really large floating macro debris, tires, refrigerators, etc. This makes them really powerful scientific tools to understand and estimate sources of contamination at different scales, and again, in different geographies. The University of Toronto team has really extensively researched the trash trapping devices they've used in the Toronto Harbor to ensure that subsampling of what's collected in these traps is a reliable way to estimate total catch weight and total count of the debris items that they encounter. Because some of these traps can capture thousands and thousands of different pieces of trash per haul, subsampling can be a really effective way to save time while still accurately collecting data on what debris has been captured. And Rafaela will talk in more detail about this a little bit later. One really great thing about this network we've created and that you're learning about today is that everyone involved is working to collect harmonized data. One day we will hopefully all be using the very same protocols to do this, so we know our data is streamlined. But the more we learn about all the different trash trapping devices out there and how our protocols may or may not work well with those devices, the more we can improve our protocols and the better our ability to extrapolate our results become. So having accurate estimates of what trash we capture is critical because it's sort of the bridge to connect science to actual policy and action. So on the policy front, really quickly, and sorry about my dog barking, he's very vocal this morning. Plastic pollution reduction policies have been on the agendas of many governments in recent years. For example, in the United States, where I'm calling in from, individual states and even counties and individual cities have passed legislation limiting the scale and distribution of certain single-use plastic items like those on the screen there. And in Canada, where Rafaela and the other University of Toronto colleagues currently are, the government in Canada announced a ban on different types of single-use plastics effective last year as well. So lots happening in this policy space, hopefully more to come in the future. But all to say, decision makers do want to be sure that the policies they pass have strong reasonings, strong scientific basis. So as such, for many of these policies, cleanup data are used to inform important decisions. So the ITTN will provide yet another strong data set, just like our international coastal cleanup data set, from which future policies could be born. For example, if one of our litter traps or other devices capturing micro debris happens to capture thousands of nurdles, for say, those pre-production plastic pellets, that may be a point source that might look at a source of nearby leakage, which should be investigated. You know, possibly policies to reduce that leakage could be looked into to stop that type of pollution at the source. So that's just an example of ways that these devices could be used to inform policy. And the last slide for me is the communication value of trash trapping devices and of the ITTN. So data collected from these devices can be incorporated to engage with the public through all kinds of different channels, from social media, which can have global reach, to infographics generated from your device's data, to educational programming, for which the ITTN now has some really valuable resources you're free to use and adapt to your area. And so these are a few examples of how the U of T trash team has used trash trapping devices for communication purposes. And really quickly, I will highlight that picture on the left, which is an image that went viral on Twitter. And Rafa, who you'll hear from later, was actually in the field doing a waste characterization from one of their trash trapping devices when she found this degraded coffee cup. And the picture confirms that there is a plastic liner inside of that coffee cup, which was actually news to many people. So that the image they posted really opened up an important dialogue on social media about the topic, about recyclability of these products, etc. So sort of circling back, the data collected through our trash traps can be displayed in many forms to engage the public in many different ways. So these devices and the data we collect have lots of benefits and allow us not only to quantitatively measure our collective impact, but also allows us many different communication opportunities, whether that's sharing images on social media, generating these cool infographics or maps based on our data, or again, developing those educational programs so we can have this really powerful scientific-based message that trash is a big problem and trash trapping devices are an important part of the solution set for this problem. So that's all I have. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then I will pass the mic right over to Rafaela.
I was mute, I'm sorry. Can you all see my screen perfectly?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so great, thanks, Britta. So now that you all have an understanding of why it's so important to use your device for data collection, let's go through and see how to do it. First off, there are two protocols that we have created to collect data, and we mentioned this a couple of times, our simple protocol and our detailed protocol. So now we will I will explain what are they. The first is the simple data protocol, which ideally would be carried out by those who maintain your trash trap device, as this is meant to be carried out at least once a day. And is intended for a device that need to be emptied out daily or very often. As Britta mentioned before, this data will be used to extrapolate it and determine how much plastic we collect versus the rest of the natural debris or other contents collected by our trash capture device. So, for instance, here in Canada, when we're using our sea bins, we collect a lot of natural debris. So we want to make sure that we are extrapolating this in our method. For this protocol, all you need is PPE gear, a scale, as you can see in the picture, and our data trapper app, which I will go through in a second. And the second protocol is our detailed data protocol. This is intended for your designer waste characterization partner, who will go and do a deep dive, as we call, into the debris and quantify and characterize the different liters caught in your trap. So they will count everything that is in your trap. Here, you do not use the data trap app, but instead you use a paper data sheet, which I will show you in a few slides. So we're starting with the simple data protocol. You simply remove the debris from your trash capture device and weight the content. Use a luggage scale. We use a luggage scale because, but you can use any scale that you feel that's comfortable, but depends on the how much will weight. So you have to have a scale that is appropriate for the size of your trap. You can then record this weight into the data trap and then throw away your debris into the garbage. This should take no more than 10 minutes. I would say 5 minutes, and of course, depend on your device. So I will share here a video and just explaining. Oh, before I do that, so the Data Trapper is an app developed by us, and you can download it from Apple Store, Google Play, and it's free. and you simply install it in your device to easily record your data. And I will quickly show you a video tutorial. This video is also in our website, so you can have access and have all the information that we are discussing here right now, you can find in our website. Okay, so let me click here. Let's see if it works. The video.
Here we are just showing you how to use the app. First, type in your name, the city where you were located, and under site, pick which marina you are within that city. And if your marina has more than one seabin, they will all be listed under seabin ID, and you can pick the one you are currently weighing and emptying. When you open the app, the date and time the bin's being removed is automatically inputted. So all you have to fill out is approximately how long your trap has been collecting litter since it was last emptied. Next, fill out whether it has rained in the past 24 hours, what the current wind and weather conditions are. Then, you'll take a photo of the seabin contents, meaning you'll just take a top view photo of the contents within the catch bag. If you were happy with the photo, press Use Photo, and then you'll have a preview of the photo that you'll be submitting. Next, you'll input the final weight of the seabin indicated on your trash scale. And lastly, you'll fill in how full your seabin was, a quarter full, half full, or full to the brim. And if there was anything particular you wanted to note down about the seabin, simply type it in the notes and you're ready to submit.
Okay, so that this video, it was actually our app was updated a little bit, so we have extra information right now, so you can choose which trapping trash do you have, trash trapping you have. So you can select, put in your name and your location, so make things easier. But as I explained, it's just wait and put some minimal information so we can you can use. The idea is for this app, it's people can use easily, so we encourage you to try to collect your data as much and as often as possible. So we understand we use terminology specific to the seabin, but this is intended to be utilized by any device that's emptied daily. So as Hannah mentioned before, we would love to have other devices that are being emptied out every day, so we can test and use this same protocol. Now moving on to the detailed protocol, you will need a few more materials than the simple data protocol, and a few of each you have to create, building yourself, which I have highlighted here in the red arrows that are the sieves. But we have ensured all of these materials can be easily found at your local hardware store or Amazon or online store. And all of this material is listed in the resource package you receive after the workshop, and also available to find on our website. So all the tiny details, what size of the mesh, how many do you need, everything is in our website with all the details. So we want to make sure that it's easily and is affordable as for all people around the world. So moving on to the actual protocol, I want to emphasize here that for those who maintain the trash trapper day to day, you don't have to do this by yourself. This is intended for your waste characterization partner. Remember when I said that we have to have some roles, people need to have different type of roles. Yeah, and this is one that you don't need to do everything by yourself. So you can have a waste characterization partner, which can be a local volunteer group, NGO, or university in your area. Or if you are motivated and have the time, you are of course more than welcome to carry this out as well. So it will depend on your capacity, really, like how many people you have. If you have volunteers, you have employees and other groups involved. So first, you need to empty out the contents of your trash trap device weighted it, and record this onto the data sheet, which we will review in the next slide. So this is the first step. The first step is the same as for the simple protocol. Once you recorded the weight, dump all the contents on the tarp and begin sorting through all the large liters. So you collect all the large liters, and we defined large liter as anything bigger than 3 centimeters. Once you remove all large liter and quantify and characterize it, you can then move to the next step, which is extracting the small stuff, the small liter, which we define anything large than 2 millimeters and smaller than 3 centimeters. So it's small, and we have here in the picture, so we printed out for our students, for example, we printed out an image so they can know exactly what the size of the from 2 millimeters to 3 centimeters to make their lives easier. Here you can take then 2 handfuls of the, oh, sorry, I moved it by mistake. Okay, so here you can take 2 handfuls of the contents leftovers after sorting through the large liter and place it into a bucket and rinsing it in water. So it's really important in this methodology, you need to have access to water and a hose specifically. So after you rinse it, you then carry out what we call French press technique, where you place a sieve inside the bucket that is with water and the content, and then you place the sieve to separate the small liter from other contents in the bucket, because what happened is when you put water and press down, all the plastic will float and will go up. And then you just dump this water into the 2 millimeters sieve, the other sieve. This is the method that we are using, and you have to repeat this step with the remaining contents on your tarp until it's all being washed. So you repeat this as many times as needed. So for each handful, we rinse it 3 times and place in the small sieve. And then you do this for your remaining content. And depend on how much material present on your sieve you have, you will probably subsample. And then you quantify and characterize all the debris from the subsample. So you can see in the image that when we have a lot of materials, we just separate in 4, and then we pick one and do the subsample and count everything, all the plastics, all the not anthropogenic debris, not only plastic, in this subsample. So that's how we do it, our detailed protocol. And of course, I explain here very fast, but we have a video as well in YouTube, in the website, and we explain all the steps very careful, and we also have our protocols with documents so you can read it. So where do you record all this data? For now, you recorded it on a paper data sheet, which we will transfer then onto an Excel spreadsheet. And this paper data sheet will be used until we can also incorporate this data collection into an app, which Sarah will explain to you next. So for now, every data that we collect, you put in a spreadsheet and send it to us, and we have a database, and we share at the end of the year, or as often you want, with you a report with everything that you're collecting. So I will pass to Sarah, that she will introduce herself, and we introduce the app that we are creating for the detailed protocol.
Thank you, Rafa. Let me switch over very quickly. Let's see there. Okay, so can you see my PowerPoint now?
Sure.
Yes, okay, great. And you can hear me okay. Hi, everyone. I know we're well into the workshop, so I will make this very quick. And luckily for us, many of us on the call are familiar with what I'm about to talk about. So I will be brief, but I am going to talk about kind of where we're hoping to evolve some of the data collection with the International Trash Trap Network, some sort of methodologies and infrastructure that you're already familiar with. And that is the CleanSwell app. So the University of Toronto team has done a fantastic job and really helped build the baseline infrastructure through the Data Trapper app, taking that methodology that Rafaela just described, and we're going to basically build off of that, both the app and the protocol on paper, and transition that into the CleanSwell app that many of you might be familiar with, just based on your typical coastline, shoreline, volunteer cleanups, traditionally done on foot with groups of volunteers, community scientists, and mainly at the moment collecting macro or larger debris. But we're really excited to build in a route within CleanSwell. And here's some screenshots of what the app currently looks like. You're welcome to download the app if it's new to you. It is free and available to download on almost all smart devices. So there is currently a menu right now at the top of the home screen of the app where you can start a basic cleanup. There's a spot where you can record a past cleanup, sort of built in this COVID-19 era that we're all still living in. But then on the other side of that, there is a placeholder for this trash capture device route within CleanSwell that we're really excited to be building out in the next couple of months. So you're getting a little bit of a preview today. And if you're part of the ITTN network, which it seems like all of you are, you'll be getting email updates when that actually does go live in the app. But for now, a couple of key features if you're new to the app. Allowing location services is really key, whether you're doing a cleanup on foot or with a trash capture device. It really does help allow the tool to just function to its highest capability and really help us understand, in the backend database where all of those data automatically go, where exactly in the world your capture device is located and where those data are coming from. So I really only have a couple more slides, but as I mentioned, there is going to be a trash collection device option in the app. Some of you might be familiar with this group feature that already exists in the app where you can tag your existing cleanup to a larger effort or maybe link it to your organization or your initiative. We're going to expand on that with the ITTN network and actually have a few more metrics in place and a few more options for your detailed waste characterization partners and you to determine, and to identify which trap you're working on. So there will be a trash type option. Obviously, as Rafa explained, the Data Trapper app started with C-bins, but is already expanded to include other trash capture devices. And from there, if your team has specific identification numbers to your device, that's where you'd have that group field to kind of add in those other names to kind of further identify your device before you get into actually entering the data there. The screen here shows kind of the macro debris data collection that already exists within the CleanSwell app. We imagine that the ITTN or the trash capture device route could look similar to this. It might look different, and we're really actually interested in your feedback, especially if you already work with a certain type of device. Maybe it's a little bit different than a C-bin. We would love to hear what your methodologies are like. So please do reach out to our team here. If you're already capturing data from a different type of device, we'd love to know what those key metrics are for you. And in addition to kind of the metrics that we already asked for, things like what date are you doing the waste characterization, some of those macro or larger debris items. We do want to capture other metrics such as weather conditions that Rafaela had mentioned a minute ago, when the device was last cleaned, some of these additional metrics that are unique to trash capture devices and not super relevant for a traditional cleanup route with volunteers. So that's why we're really excited to kind of build out a few more screens in the app to capture all of those measurements that you and your teams may need as you progress with your trash capture projects. And then when the data do get submitted on the app, they, just like any other data collected through CleanSwell, will shoot off to this open access online database called TIDES. This already exists, so many of you are familiar with this. There's actually a way that you can kind of go in and add your own data after the fact right into this database, but really through the app is going to be key. And we do a lot of work to make sure that these data are open access for you, for partners, for decision makers, for scientists, just so that you can keep tabs on the trash that is captured through your device on a regular basis. But what Rafaela and I think others in the team had mentioned too, we're actually really excited to create annual reports for our ITTN partners as well, and help build out some really cool infographics for you, kind of hit those milestones and see the impact that you're having through the trash captured in your device over time. But this is the database where all those data will go, and you can not only see the trash collected and the litter collected from your device, but compared to others as well. So for those of you who are familiar with tides, at the moment, you just see all sorts of cleanups on the map there. You can see cleanups from the app, CleanSwell, and then also data that are manually entered from larger events and from the existing ICC paper data cards. So we envision down the road there being a third option where you can just filter out for trash collected and data collected through trash capture devices. And just like in the database that already exists, there is that group name feature that I kind of alluded to earlier in the CleanSwell app. So you can then go in and search, like I did here as an example. We have a couple partners that are already putting their trash capture device in Tides through a Bandalong device. And you can see if I just start typing in Bandalong, that group's name comes up, and then we can filter for just their device's data, pull reports in a couple of clicks, and it makes it really easy to kind of keep track of your impact over time. I think that's all I have for this session. I know we needed to catch up on some time. So here's the contact information for Britta, Rafaela, and I. Actually, I think, oh, we need to update this. Sorry, Britta, I have my old slides back. So we will share all of our contact information after the workshop as well. So no worries there on trying to get in touch with us through the slide. And I think that wraps up our session on data collection. Not sure if we have a couple minutes for questions, but I'll pass the mic back over to our MC.
Britta, you can share your email in our chat. That would be a good idea.
Thanks, everybody.
I will share mine as well. Have any questions about collecting data? Our methodology?
I know that was a lot of information, so we're always welcome to take the questions offline as well or over email later. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, and yes, and one thing, it's feel free to contact us later. And if you need anything, even when you are building if you decide to do it, and you're building your materials for collecting detailed data, if you're having any difficulties, you can contact us. Maybe we have a call and we explain details and do whatever we can do it to help you. So.
Hey, I think if we don't have any questions, although you might think of them and you can certainly have time to answer or ask questions later, we'll move on to our third panel, which is about outreach and education. So thank you, Sarah, Britta, and Rafaela. And then if the other two are already sharing screen, and then Truett will spotlight Robyn and Maddie, and we'll go ahead and give you the mic to talk all about outreach and education for our final 30-minute block.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chelsea. I'm sharing my screen. Can everyone see the slide?
Yeah, it looks good. It's not the full screen. Do you want it to be? We can see the top.
Yeah, let me get it in presentation mode. Excuse me.
And I don't see Maddie, but she's there and having camera issues. Is that right?
Yes, I thought I had fixed it, and now Zoom is unable to detect a camera once again.
Bummer.
Oh. I know. I was on for a minute.
Okay, Maddie, we can hear you.
Great.
All right. I'm going to give Maddie, I'll talk a little bit while Maddie figures out our slides. So I'm Robyn Stegman. I'm a senior manager of digital campaigns at Ocean Conservancy. Maddie is a communications manager with our Trash Seas team. And we're going to talk a little bit about once you build those wonderful trash traps and you have them in your community, how do you really harness the power and like do more with it by having really compelling communication campaigns.
Okay, I don't know if I'm going to be able to find the with the giant screen that I have here. So let's just get into it then. Great.
Maddie, if you want, I can download the presentation and share it on my end too.
That would be great if you can.
Okay, great. Just give me 1 second. Maybe you want to take, since the next slide is yours anyways, do you want to take that while I do get the presentation up on my end?
Absolutely. Thank you all for your patience and for the technical difficulties. Yeah, so as Robyn mentioned, we are both with Ocean Conservancy. You've heard from quite a few Ocean Conservancy folks at this point, but just as a reminder, we are a US-based advocacy organization that focuses on the most pressing challenges facing our ocean today. And one such challenge, as we all know, is plastic pollution. Robyn and I are both on Ocean Conservancy's brand communications and digital team. As part of that, we focus on slightly different areas. Robyn focuses on digital communications, which includes our Ocean Conservancy's website, email communications, text alerts, mobile alerts, as well as social media. And I focus more on traditional media, which I will speak to a bit later in the presentation. But both of us work with the trash team and specifically work a lot with the ICC team. And as we all know, International Coastal Cleanup mobilizes millions of people across the world every year to collect trash. In over 37 years, we've collected over 350 million pounds of trash worldwide, all the while collecting data on each item. And so together with the U of T trash team, we founded the ITTN as a way to scale up that impact of the ICC by connecting groups around the world implementing trash trapping technologies. And so as part of that, we want to be able to help scale up communications around trash trappers and help show the public, the potential of these devices, as well as create more local engagement and awareness of the trash problem. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Robyn, who will speak more about how we go about doing that.
Great. And just want to check now that folks are seeing the slideshow since we switched over.
It looks great.
Yep.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Let's continue. So as Chelsea said before, in addition to working at Ocean Conservancy, I worked for years with Mr. Trash Wheel, building that social media campaign for that. For those who aren't familiar, Mr. Trash Wheel is a large trash trapper in Baltimore. We also put googly eyes, so like very big personable eyes on it, and created like a whole voice and persona and campaign around it to really be able to do more than just what the device could do. With our campaign, we were able to not only do behavior change campaigns, so getting people to think about their trash and making sure that their trash is properly managed and doesn't end up in our waterways and our streets to begin with, but it also allowed, by running a communication campaign around the trash wheel, it really helped us unlock its fundraising ability. Not only did we reach new potential grant funders and private funders, we also were able, through merchandising and events, create a fundraising potential within the community. It also, we were in the National Geographic. We were one of CNN's top 10 stories of the year. We were able to get a lot of traditional media from having this like googly eye and this persona, where we got reporters to discover us that way. It also helped through our data, which we'll talk about, really using your data later. And by having this large community of people who were really engaged with us, we were able to really have a important advocacy tool to bring people to city council meetings, to state meetings, to come in force, but also to really quantify, like when we were banning polystyrene or styrofoam in our city, we were able to say, like, this is the percentage of styrofoam that we're seeing in our trash trap, which really made a big difference for Baltimore lawmakers. And then also, I mean, we gained international status for people all over the world who saw our trash traps, saw Baltimore as a model. People like folks at University of Toronto were able to come to us and we were able to share. Because we created this communication campaign, we were able to reach far beyond our city and our state to reach people all over the world who were also looking for solutions for ocean plastics. So this is just a couple examples of the impact we had, or just the way that people really adopted the trash wheel as being part of a movement. There are tattoos, costumes, artwork that people did. It really became an icon in Baltimore and part of something that Baltimore was proud of. And that really helped us reach more people, open doors to new opportunities, because people in the community saw the trash wheel as part of them, part of their culture, and part of their community. So I joke that, like, when we started this presentation, the title was why you should put googly eyes on your trash trap. I don't think everybody should put googly eyes on their trash trap, but I do think everybody should really think about the communication campaign that's behind it, because if not, you're really losing an opportunity to help develop upstream solutions and larger solutions with your trash trap beyond just what that technology is doing in the water. People are really excited about these new technologies. People are really engaged on this issue, and you have a great opportunity to spotlight how you are handling the issue and to get people thinking about new ways that they can get involved. So when you're developing your communication campaign, there are a couple of elements that no matter what you do, whether or not you put googly eyes and you do something that's social media focused, whether or not you create a on-the-ground campaign that's at where you go to community events or just door-to-door to your community, there are certain principles that any good trash trap communication campaign should follow. The first is meeting your audience where you are. We sometimes, when we design communication campaigns, we have this notion that, like, just create it and like all of these people are going to come to you. And really, what you need to do is come to your audience. So every good communication campaign isn't as much about speaking as it is about listening, looking at where does your audience live, online or in person? What are the news sources or social media sources that they are searching for? What kind of content are they engaging with? A couple of examples here for the trash wheel. One of the things that we did was put the trash wheel through Photoshop into memes or big cultural moments. This is for Dolly Parton, who is a famous singer. So really, like, content that people were already kind of engaging with, where could we add the trash wheel into that moment? An example from Ocean Conservancy is that we know that people search online for facts about ocean animals. So one of the things that we do is we write a lot of blogs about commonly asked questions, like even just random questions. Do sharks sneeze? Is it octopi or octopuses? And we write those blogs because people are searching for that anyways, but we know if we can get that blog out there, they're going to click on our blog, and not only are they going to get the information they're searching for, they're also going to get our conservation message, and they're going to get tools to actually impact the ocean by getting involved with us. So in both of those examples, it's first figuring out, like, what is the audience already liking and sharing, and how can you be part of that narrative? And this could be anything from creating a TikTok dance to doing a song to going at a local community event, whatever that means for you. Like, where are the people that you want gathering, and how can you be a part of that event or message already that is created already? The next step, or the next kind of principle, is always to make it personal. Oftentimes when we're telling a story, we have the tendency to make it about us, to make it about the trash trap, but how is that trash trap also part of a collective story, part of the community story? So for Mr. Trash Wheel, we spent a lot of time really developing a voice, but also like making sure that we were sharing things that were important to Baltimore, whether that was one time a small earthquake that like happened that everybody felt and was talking about, to sports games or big media moments. In this case, like, but also like, what are ways that we can engage the community in our work? So another example from the trash wheel that you see a picture here is our dumpster dive. This was really important to us, where we actually got people who are fans of the trash wheel to come and catalog every piece of trash that was in the trash wheel's dumpster. That helped us better understand what the trash, what kind of trash we were picking up. We could have easily done that with staff and other volunteers, but the reason we really targeted our fans and people who loved us was that we wanted them to feel like when we put out those statistics, like they are doing the gritty work, they are part of those statistics. And so that helps encourage interactivity and help build your community. You can also do this virtually or through email or text. This is an example of a text message that we recently did to Ocean Conservancy, where we asked them a couple of questions in like a quiz, and we told them what their inner ocean animal was, and they got personalized responses from this with a opportunity to engage with us that was based on whatever that ocean animal was. So you're a beluga whale, here's how you can take action to protect beluga whales. Even something like that, that's like you're asking 3 questions that are kind of silly about, like, do you consider yourself a summer person or a winter person? And then you giving them some sort of personal response, it makes it feel like, oh, I was a part of this story or this narrative. So there are big ways that you can do it, like doing an event and inviting, or small ways you can do it, like doing a poll or asking a question, to really make it seem like they're a part of shaping this communication campaign. And then also getting creative. So this is a picture from the trash wheel. We did Order the Wheel, which is a secret society in which people had to go out and volunteer and do actions in their community, from learning about their local watershed to helping to prevent fats from going down the drain, so that we can prevent fatbergs, like we talked about earlier. All of these different actions, and they completed those actions. They were invited to be part of a secret society, and we did like a whole performance to welcome them into this group. We did regular emails to them. We had a secret handshake and sign that they could do. It was really fun, but the important thing is that we could not have gotten as many people to do these environmental actions if we had just asked them. By putting it into the language of like, ooh, you're in a special group and only people who care about the environment are in this group, by creating that sense of community and doing something creative that other environmental organizations weren't doing, we were able to get about 10 times the amount of people and reaction to the campaign that we had in previous campaigns. So just like the trash trap is innovative and new, and there's so many options out there to get engaged, also feel free to get creative about the way that you are introducing that trash trap to your community. It doesn't have to be dressing it up. It could be about how you, in that invitation to be involved. It could be about, again, like, it could be a song or a dance or something that is like different than the ways that people are used to engaging with in your community. So don't be afraid to be original and to try those out of the box creative solutions. You'll oftentimes find that you'll get more impact from that creativity. And then lastly, using your data, and I'm going to turn it back to Maddie to talk about ways that you can use your data to fuel your communication campaigns.
Yes, thank you, Robyn. Disembodied voice here. I think we've heard a lot about the importance of data from others earlier today, but it is a really valuable tool for public communications. It can help inform campaign focuses. ICC data specifically has helped inform Ocean Conservancy calls to action around items like cutlery, straws, cigarette butts, and as you can see here, food wrappers. It fuels advocacy. You know, we know that lawmakers want to see the data for things that they're asking, like people are asking them to tackle, like, and this data is a critical tool for that. It helps activate your audience As Robyn mentioned, as you're creating a audience for your trash trapping work, people are already engaged. It just gives them another data point / activation point for getting involved. And it is an interesting news hook. We have seen this time and time again with ICC data. And one case study I'd like to highlight is in 2019, food wrappers overtook cigarette butts for the very first time as the #1 item collected worldwide. And by tracking that data year on and year out, it gave us a news hook to pitch to media. We found this was like a really interesting angle to journalists and traditional media, largely in part because, it was new. And then it gave us an inroad to talk about the ICC writ large. On that note, I'd like to talk a little bit more about how you can connect with traditional media. So Robyn, next slide, if you can. So when we talk about traditional media, we're talking about broadcast TV, radio, print outlets, like magazines, newspapers, plus their online editions. And so connecting with traditional media means connecting with the gatekeepers of that media. So you're really your audience for these sort of messages are really producers, bookers, editors, and journalists. And your goal is to pitch them your story. It can also be more direct in the form of op-eds or letters to the editor. And these are really great tools that are really quite widely read. But at the same time, it's important to ensure that your message is tailored to your audience, as Robyn mentioned earlier. So how do you tailor your message to traditional media? In addition to the many areas that Robyn already covered, like making it personal and getting creative, there are a few tips that we, in the communications world, really try to follow. So the first is to make your pitch timely. Journalists always want something new or flashy. So question to ask yourself, is this the first trash trap in your area? Is there maybe local legislation about plastic where your trap is located that you could connect to? Does your trap use new or interesting technologies? One example that's on the screen here was from a trap that Ocean Conservancy worked with local partners to install in Vietnam. And we pitched that to some sort of technology focused outlets, and it did result in a story about this new trash trap. So really just be on the lookout for opportunities that you could take advantage of. Another tip that we follow is to make your pitch impactful. So does your story move the needle in a meaningful way, or does it stir emotion and tell a story? Do you have photos and videos on hand that you can provide to these media outlets to help really show the impact of the work you're doing? And I will say that for a story like a trash trap that is quite visual in nature, those are basically must-haves. And then just make it specific. This just goes back to knowing your audience. In the case of journalists / news outlets, trash traps are generally a pretty local story. So getting to know journalists in your area and finding out what sort of stories they're covering can be a huge boon to gaining media coverage. There are like dedicated PR tools to help find information about journalists, but honestly, social media is a great way to connect with these outlets and individuals directly. And then of course, just keeping track of data trends and using that as a hook. And then just be prepared for questions. I think we've covered some of these questions in the chat today, but there are several that are just gonna come up when you're interacting with the public and talking about trash traps. I would say probably the big three that come to my mind are, what do you do with the waste collected? What steps are you taking to make sure that the trap doesn't harm animal life? And is cleaning up trash really that important? So just sort of prepping answers to those questions before you start communicating public is critical. And next slide. Thank you very much. And finally, we are here to help tell your story. If you have interesting stories of trash trapping that you want to share, there are a few ways to go about that. ITTN does not currently have its own dedicated social media pages. We do have a Facebook group, but we are sharing content on the U of T's social media as well as Ocean Conservancy social media. So if you have stories that you'd like us to highlight, please let us know. We'd love to hear your stories. You can email us at info@trashtrapnetwork.org, use our hashtag #trappingtrash, or join our Facebook group and post on there. It will get to us in one of those ways, and we will be on the lookout for those amazing stories. And I'll just turn it back over to Robyn and see if she has anything final to add.
I'll just add to your last point about being prepared to answer questions. One of the things that I know from my time with a trash trap is that oftentimes people in the community see your trash trap more than you, and they are oftentimes the first people to notice. Like, I'll give an example. Like, there was a couple of ducklings that like a mama duck that decided to nest in our dumpster. And the ducklings had a ton of fun playing. Like, they would sit on the conveyor belt into the dumpster and then jump off. And they were just like playing, but people thought that they possibly were like trapped there. And so before we even knew about mama duck and ducklings and anything like that, we just saw a bunch of videos on social media of these ducklings. And so just being prepared to, one, like have monitoring, whether that means like, making sure there are people who are regularly looking at whatever your social media handles are, or having Google alerts set up, or just like having people around in the community who are regularly passing by those trash traps is really important, so that when those things happen, that you can be part of that conversation and you can answer questions and steer that conversation, because it does happen where like, random things happen to your trash wheel. We've had the googly eyes blow off in the wind. We had a snake that crawled up and wrapped itself around our battery, that we had to work with folks to figure out what to do with the snake. Like, it's a wild world. And so just being prepared so that you're not panicking in those situations, and you can work with you and whoever your team is to communicate when they happen. And I think that's it. If people have questions, we're happy to answer questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Robyn, and thank you, Maddie. Does anyone have questions or comments? You can put them in the chat, or again, you can raise your hand and ask any questions that you have. And if no one has comments or questions on this specific presentation, we will open it up to all presentations. But I would say, Robyn, that was awesome to hear you talk about all of the communication information regarding your experience with the trash wheel. I feel like I could like take a 4-hour communication training from you. Very useful. And I like the comment about meeting your audience where they are, because I think in each community, there might be like, I guess, different cultural differences, or different, for example, for us, we would highlight a raccoon, and in other places they might highlight a polar bear, or whatever organism is kind of a star in their community. And so the different things you can play with, just from differences in the communities that might interact and see the trap. But for Mr. Trash Wheel, I mean, that got global reach. So your community was huge.
Yeah, it definitely was like a little different because, yeah, we had a larger community. But I do think like we were always tying that line between like making sure we still felt like from Baltimore, even though we had that international community. Like, I think you guys have that perfect example of the Tim Hortons cup. Like, Rafa found, like, yes, it is like pretty shocking with like plastic lining, but I have to imagine in Canada, like the Tim Hortons expose in a sense, like resonated in a
Meant
different
more.
way than it might have in like other places.
Yeah, that's funny. We'll have to find a Starbucks cup that's rotting in that same way where you can see the plastic liner.
I have one
Michelle
quick
says,
addition.
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say one quick addition that I'm not sure if we've touched on yet today, so I wanted to reemphasize it to the audience here. We have created some kind of ready to go materials through the ITTN, kind of cool looking designs. They've got that logo that you see here on this slide. So if you or your group are kind of just curious about like how to get started or what sort of messaging we have used or we have found to be helpful, we have some of those kind of ready to go design templates in the toolkit that I know we'll be sharing after the workshop as well. If we don't have it in other languages, I'll have to double check with you, Hannah, but we can work to get it in the language that you need. We can work with you on translations, but just to kind of get over that initial design hurdle might be helpful. I think we have a flyer or kind of a sign template that describes if someone were to just walk up to a trap, you know, what is this device doing in this body of water? And it is part of the International Trash Trap Network. So did just want to emphasize that in case it wasn't clear through our presentations.
It's an excellent point, Sarah. Thank you. And we're also working on creating educational materials for outreach events or school programs that you might do around the trap. So we're trying to make resources where people can plug and play a bit, but also we hope that people will cater some of these things to their own locations to meet their audience where they are. Awesome. Okay, so it seems pretty quiet in the chat and with questions. So I think for all of the panelists that were part of these 3 sessions, thank you so much. I want to turn it over to people in the room or the panelists in general to maybe either comment on either in the chat or raising their hand some of the key points that you think you heard or extra questions that you may have. I think it's really neat with trash trapping to be able to highlight there are 3 really key benefits that you get from these, right? And they are, of course, trapping trash and diverting it from the environment, but also quantifying the data to measure your impact, share impact, and inform upstream solutions. And then the education and outreach can get really fun, from local dives into the waste with the public, just like a cleanup, but on a trap, to really fun social media campaigns and traditional media campaigns, and a ton of opportunity. Any final comments or thoughts? And we have a bit of a smaller group. I think a lot of people had to drop off with the power, which we apologize for that in our timing. I also hope we can get a trash trap in every major river in Toronto. And before people do drop off, Hannah actually just has a few last words. So Hannah, do you want to share your screen and bring us to the final few words so we can make sure everyone gets the materials that they need in order to move forward?
Sure. I'll just briefly, it's like a couple of minutes, so I will just share. So just really to finalize, just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today and for staying with us throughout the last few hours. We really appreciate it, and we hope that it's provided a great opportunity to meet other groups and learn lots about trash trapping and share what we've learned so far. And thank you for engaging in all the conversations, asking questions. And also, again, Chaz has already said this, but I would really like to give a big thank you to all the speakers and presenters, especially Toshka for joining us today and speaking about your work. It was really, really interesting to hear all about it. I'm sure you'll get a lot of questions afterwards about what you've done so far. And then for those of you who are interested in joining the ITTN, I will share in the chat just before we leave all the links that you might want for our resources and how to contact us. But just while we're here, you can also scan the QR code. It will take you straight to our website. And you can always contact us, ask any questions that you have about the network, about joining the network, about our resources at info@trashtrapnetwork.org. And if you're not quite ready to become a part of the network, but you want to stay in touch, you can also join our mailing list. So I'll send that link in the chat in just a moment. I can probably do it now. And so we also have our Facebook group as well. So lots of ways to keep in touch. And please, I'm just going to share it in the chat. Sorry, I'm pausing while I speak. I can't do two things at once. That should have shared now. So please follow those links and let us know. And I think that is it for today. We did have a final question for everyone, which we can ask if anyone wants to chip in. But what's one thing you've learned from today's workshop? I think I've learned, I can start. I think I've learned that there's lots of different things to consider, and the planning, I think I always say this, but I think the planning part of the trash tracking project is so important, and taking the time to do that at the start means you reap so many benefits whilst the project is ongoing. And it's been really interesting to hear how that differs between each location. It's really location and project specific. Any final thoughts from anyone before we leave? I am not looking at the chat. Yeah, Toshka's team is unstoppable. It seems so, Britta. You're not alone in some of the roadblocks and hurdles we've encountered, and Chelsea's learned about ways in which we can jump over them from others. Everything was useful and very insightful. Thank you very much, Tyler. Thank you for coming. Thank you, David. I'm glad you thought it's time well spent. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and keep in touch. We will follow up afterwards to make sure that everyone stays in touch.